They said they had like a mushroom that you get under the cool off. And they said, I know this is probably when it first started. They said, by the end of the thing, it's just brown water coming out.
Convenient join, but it doesn't say present on going voting.
I mean, I've never gone, but. What's Tanya there?
Just fine, how are you?
You like it? You like it?
Yes.
Hey, Tony,
Really, that'll be pretty easy. It's just gonna be the pin for your
you don't have to bring your iPads now.
for your iPad. So just same pin
Not
as
a,
your
not a
iPad.
problem.
6 digits. It's got the 2-3 on the end.
We might need a little help at the end of the meeting for some folks cutting bill.
So that is your email, and then that is the board portal.
So this is only going to be mine if I've got my pen logged in. Right?
Yep. Yep. Nobody else will be able to get in there.
I'm going to have to reset my password. So I don't know if you need to do that.
That's fine. So I would click remember me.
Let's see if I can do that.
Yeah.
So if you click continue here and then forgot my password and then tab,
So is she in kind of green? Is that their district?
and I would open your email right there. Should already be
So
there.
she's just
There it is.
here because Connie Green probably asked her to come.
Yeah, Connie must live on.
Whatever password you want to set.
Did she say something?
Down there's some. Yeah, it's her district. Yeah.
Eric and Patty's district borders on Connie.
It wasn't opening like a Word document. I don't know why. It's weird. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you.
You know.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I see that it is 5:30, so I would like to call tonight's meeting to order and welcome everyone here for the meeting. If you're here for the June 8th Columbia City Council meeting, you're at the right place. But before we get into the formal council meeting, we do have a number of public hearings that we'll first have to read aloud and provide an opportunity for individuals to speak. You'll notice on these public hearings that the first the first 1 through 6 that I'm going to read out are public hearings all related to the Trotwood Avenue project, which also happens to have 6 items accompanying it on the actual agenda, hence the 6 public hearing matters that we'll have. If you're here tonight and have signed up to speak on the Trotwood project, as I will refer to it as, you have the option to speak at the public hearing or the option to speak at the city council meeting on the topic. Public hearings were put in place by the legislature as a way to ensure that the public had an opportunity to speak on important items and on items impacting annexations and zoning, and certainly the Trotwood project includes that. Because city councils do not have to allow for public comments, and so the public hearing sort of made sure that the council would allow for that. This council, as most councils across Tennessee, does allow public comments, and so essentially there's a little bit of redundancy when you have to have a public hearing, but you also allow public comments. All that to say, you're welcome to speak on either topic, but for now, bear with me as we read through what will be 11 public hearings. Public hearing number 1 on Resolution 2329 relates to item 9.1, a resolution to annex and approve a plan of services for properties and portions of properties at tax map 112, parcels 2.03, 910, 1001, and 1007 located off Trotwood Avenue into the city of Columbia, Tennessee, Ward 1. Anyone in the audience wish to speak on public hearing number 1 this evening? Mr. Peden?
My comments will be related all through 1 through 6.
Do you want to speak at the public hearing portion, or do you want to speak on the council?
Hearing.
Okay.
Let's just wait to let you read through the first 6.
Okay. Anyone else wish to be heard on public hearing number 1? All right. You have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Eric Privetti. I live at 101 Casey Valley Drive in the Sunnyside subdivision. I currently serve as chairman of the Murray County Commission. And on all the items related to Trotwood, I'm here to speak against the action proposed before the city at this point. We've talked about this before multiple times. Trotwood just can't handle it. We've been in our house there since 1977. And that said, it used to be easy to get home, but with all the growth spurt and everything that has happened in the county here in the past 8 years, we're getting congested. Traffic patterns have already changed. I used to drive up and down James Campbell to get home, turn at Trotwood and go home. That's no longer a viable option because of all the congestion now, and that's part of the price of growth. You have the ability to widen some roads, but even in the plan, which I get I have several other commissioners here tonight. They're going to speak about the plan, and in that it mentions that Tennessee might widen Trotwood Avenue in 10 or 15 years. I don't think that's going to happen in our lifetime period. It's just not feasibly possible because there's no right-of-ways. There's nothing. You got parking lots. You have a piece of road, and then immediately the parking lot for the businesses start. You've got the golf cart course immediately starts. When they rebuilt the bridge over Bigby Creek, they only made it a 2-lane bridge because they never intended to ever widen that. How they thought they were going to widen it, they would have done it when they built it. And just also the increased traffic that's going to cause at the schools, Rutherford Lane. It's just, I would like to encourage you to not do this. All the growth and everything that's happening on the north side is one thing, but the southwest corner of Columbia, is rural. It's been rural, and I think that we're already full. I am not the city council, yet the residents, I get phone calls on every of the issues being on the county commission. I represent Sunnyside. They're against it. There are, the traffic, the problems that it's already going to cause. Egress in and out of Pleasant Drive is a problem as it is. I just hope that you would vote no. I'm speaking my piece. I'm honoring the request of my constituents in the 2nd District, saying that they are not for this, and I thank you for your time.
All right. Anyone else wish to be heard on public hearing number 1? Hearing none from the audience, any member of council wish to be heard on public hearing number 1? Hearing none, entertain a motion to close public hearing number 1. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll take the vote. So can we call the roll on that,
And
please?
Mr. Coleman,
Yeah, to close the vote.
Okay.
Mr. Green, Ms. Hardison, Mr. Marshall, Mrs. Wiles, Vice Mayor McBroom, Mayor Mulder.
Aye. Public hearing number 1 is now closed. Next item 2, public hearing on ordinance 4456 relating to item 10.1 and ordinance to amend ordinance 4400, the zoning ordinance for the city of Columbia by rezoning a portion of tax map 112 parcel 9 located at 6150 Trotwood Avenue from CD2 to PUD residential Ward 1. Any member of the audience wish to be heard on public hearing number 2 this evening? Hearing none. Any member of council wish to be heard on public hearing number 2? Hearing none, entertain a motion to close public hearing number 2. Been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on that item? Hearing none, we'll take the vote, please.
Mr. Coleman,
Aye.
Mr. Green,
Aye.
Ms. Hardison, Mr. Marshall,
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles, Vice Mayor McBroom, Mayor Mulder.
Aye. Public hearing number 2 is now closed. Next item, public hearing 3, public hearing on ordinance number 4457 relating to item 10.2 on the agenda, and ordinance to amend ordinance 4400, the same being the zoning ordinance of the city of Columbia to zone property being annexed by resolution 2329, located at 6150 Trotwood Avenue, being a portion of tax maps 112 parcel 9 to plan unit development residential Ward 1. Anyone in the audience wish to be heard on public hearing number 3? Seeing none, anyone on council wish to be heard on public hearing number 3? Hearing none, entertain a motion to close public hearing number 3. It's been moved and properly seconded by Councilmember Coleman. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, take the vote, please.
Mr. Coleman,
Aye.
Mr. Green, Ms. Hardison, Mr. Marshall, Mrs. Wiles, Vice Mayor McBroom, Mayor Mulder.
Aye. Public hearing number 3 is now closed. Next item, public hearing number 4 on ordinance 4458 relating to item 10.3 on the agenda, an ordinance to amend ordinance 4400, the zoning ordinance of the city of Columbia to zone properties being annexed by resolution 2329, tax map 112, parcels 2.03 and 10.01 off Trotwood Avenue and Old Zion Road to plan unit development residential. This is also Ward 1. Any member of the audience wish to be heard on public hearing number 4? You'll introduce yourself. You have the floor for 3 minutes. Thank you for being here.
I'm Connie Green. I represent District 4. I'm a county commissioner. And I'm here to speak against this project off Trotwood. And I have several reasons for that. First of all, you put in 111 homes behind me. 125 are going in on Rutherford, 120 something in Foster Lane. You're putting in over 300 homes on Trotwood that has access to Trotwood. One of my major concerns was today, as I was mowing my front yard, for 40 minutes, there were 3 tractors that went down Trotwood Avenue. And the big trucks were trying to pass. And I have a double yellow line in front of my house. And I was watching one of the trucks decided he wasn't staying behind any tractor. And this keeps going on all the time. I'm concerned about ambulances getting up and down Trotwood. This is a 2-lane road. The reason 43 was put in, and I know this quite well because my uncle was on the state legislation. He was responsible for highways. J.B. Napier said, we're putting in 43 to protect 243 and to keep traffic off of 43. How are you going to get to your doctor's appointments if you live, or the hospital, if you live in Mount Pleasant, if you live anywhere along Trotwood? You can't. You've got to go down Trotwood to get to the hospital. And you need to consider that because the traffic on Trotwood is horrendous. We have no grocery stores out that way. How are you going to go to a grocery store if you're in Sunnyside, Westwood, Graymere? You have to go down Trotwood. So those are some of my major concerns about the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else wish to be heard on public hearing number 4? And Mr. Peden, I'll have you on number 6 if that's all right. Would you like to be heard on number 4? Come on up. Or if you want to have number 5, come on down. If you'll introduce yourself, you have the floor for 3 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Patty Hollingsworth. I'm also the county commissioner for District 2. And I live on 2105 Alpine Drive. Now the traffic is so bad, I have to come down and come out in front of Graymare. And there's not even any subdivisions even built, except for the ones that's been built in Savannah Cove, where I live. But I'm more concerned about my 85-year-old mother. She lives in Westwood. She still drives. She likes to go places. And I'm really concerned about how she's going to be getting around if the other subdivision is built, because she goes down to the Casey Lane to come out, and there's so many times that cars, they don't stop anymore like they used to. They run the red lights. I'm afraid for my mother's life there, and I'm also worried that the ambulance might not be able to get to her with all the traffic concerns. And I appreciate y'all listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard on public hearing number 4 from the audience? Hearing none. Anyone on council wish to be heard on public hearing number 4? Seeing none, entertain a motion to close public hearing number 4. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, we'll take the vote.
Mr.
To
Coleman?
close.
Mr. Green, Ms. Hardison, Mr. Marshall, Mrs. Wiles, Vice Mayor McBroom, Mayor Martin.
Aye. That
Mayor
public
Mulder.
hearing number 4 is now closed. Next item, public hearing 5, public hearing on ordinance number 4460 related to item 10.4, an ordinance or to amend ordinance 4400, the zoning ordinance of the city of Columbia to zone property being annexed by resolution 2329 located off Old Zion Road, portion of tax map 112, parcel 10.07 to plan unit residential ward 1. Anyone in the audience wish to be heard on public hearing number 5? Hearing none. Anyone on council wish to be heard on public hearing number 5? Seeing none, entertain a motion to close public hearing number 5. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll take the vote.
Mr. Coleman? Aye. Mr. Green? Aye. Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Aye. Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that public hearing is now closed. Next, 6, public hearing on ordinance 4461 relating to item 10.5, an ordinance to amend ordinance 4400, the zoning ordinance of the city of Columbia by approving the Old Zion Road preliminary master plan PUD located off Trotwood Avenue at tax map 112, parcels 2.03, 9, 10.01, and 10.07. This is Ward 1. Anyone in the audience wish to be heard on public hearing number 6? Mr. Peden.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, my name's Bruce Peden. I live at 6604 St. John's Way in Ashwood Manor in Columbia. My comments are intended to address this project as a whole, and which is why I waited until all were called. The views I express are mine and mine alone personally. I speak only for myself and not on behalf of any other person or any other entity. Any proposed connection to Yateman Lane to this project is totally unacceptable to me. As I was leaving this morning to come to work, as I pulled out onto Yateman, I met a lady with her 2 children. She was pushing a baby carriage. Beside her in the street was he looked to be 2 or 3 years old, riding a little tiny bicycle, just smiling and riding right along beside them. I drove just a little further. I met my neighbor, Miss Wilson. She had her big golden retriever walking that dog on Yateman Lane. I went just a little bit further, and I met one of my other neighbors taking a morning walk on Yateman Lane. The staff report that you have in your packet at page 63 states that the Planning Commission reviewed this request and recommended approval with a vote of 4-2 at the April 12, 2023 meeting. That statement is inaccurate. The Planning Commission, after motion by Mayor Mulder and second by Mr. Hutto, voted 4-2 to recommend approval with the condition that there be no connection to Yateman Lane. That was the 4-2 vote of the Planning Commission. Under both the old zoning ordinance and the new zoning ordinance, if the Planning Commission recommends approval with conditions, it is required to issue a statement in writing stating those conditions, and that has not been done. Okay, so there's no statement in your packet from the Planning Commission as to those conditions. I'm not aware of a single person who lives in Ashwood Manor that wants this connection. I've not talked to everybody, but I'm not aware of anybody that wants Yateman Lane connected to 750 home development. The county road superintendent expressed his concern about it early on in this project. The developers of the project, when they first proposed it, they didn't even have the connection as part of their proposal. So apparently the only reason it's an issue is that the city staff insisted upon it. The developer, understandably, they want to get the project approved. They succumbed to that suggestion or that insistence that they make that connection. Last month, this council discussed and voted to approve this project with what I would term to be confusing conditions that involved right-of-way dedication, letters of credit from the developer to be held for 10 years, and subject to a petition or referendum approved by 80% of the lots in Ashwood for a future connection to this. For the life of me, I cannot conceive how such a condition can be enforced. Who will enforce it? Who is going to remember it? This project started with no connection, then it morphed into having a connection, then it morphed into having a connection with gates, then it went back to no connection, and then now we're back before this council with a connection with strings attached for the next 10 years. There are no sidewalks in Ashwood Manor. There are no walking trails in Ashwood Manor. The residents of Ashwood Manor, our children and our grandchildren, we ride our bikes and we walk our dogs on Yateman Lane. Leave it alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peden. Anyone else wish to be heard on public hearing number 6? Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, friends, and neighbors. I stand before you today as a fellow resident and someone who cares deeply about the growth and prosperity of our community. I'm here to discuss the proposed annexation and rezoning request concerning the Trotwood development. With respect, I'm here to ask you, our elected representatives, to vote no on this request. Let me be clear, this isn't about opposing growth or denying the fact that Columbia is a dynamic and evolving city. On the contrary, it's about how we wish to grow, where we choose to focus that growth. It's about understanding and embracing our identity as a community and recognizing the significance of the decisions we make for the future of our city. We're all neighbors, each of us adding to the vibrant tapestry that makes up Columbia. We are all part of this fantastic community that we call home. And home, as we know, is not just an assortment of buildings and roads. It's where we raise our families, where we meet our friends, where we live, laugh, and sometimes learn life's harshest lessons. Our city is a living testament to these shared experiences, a testament of our collective dreams and aspiration. Now, the question before us is whether we should allow the annexation of land right out to our urban growth boundary. We must ask ourselves, is this truly the best interest of our city and our community? Or should we instead focus on infill development within our city limits, nurturing the heart of Columbia, enhancing our community's existing fabric, strengthening our bonds as neighbors? Your positions on the council are indeed positions of trust, and we, the people, place our trust in your decision. Let me remind you, there is no statutory obligation on your part to approve this annexation or rezone request. We elected you as representatives, as custodians of our collective will, and we trust you to make decisions that reflect the best interest of our community. As representatives of the people, we ask you to err on the side of the people, the residents, the heartbeat of this community. We ask you to protect our shared spaces, to encourage development that fosters connectivity and inclusivity, and to cultivate growth that bolsters the character of our community. I want to take a moment to acknowledge your tireless efforts, your dedication, and your service. We understand you undertake this thankless job because you share our love for the city and you wish to see it thrive. For that, we're grateful. Yet today we ask you, stand with the people, these people, as our representatives, to hear our voices, to stand with us, and to vote no on the Trotwood development. Let us continue to focus on infill development. Let's strengthen our core, and together let's make our city, our county, an example of sustainable and community-focused growth. Thank you for your time, your service, and your consideration. I'm confident you'll make the best decision that serves our community.
Anyone else wish to be heard on public hearing number 6? Anyone on council wish to be heard on public hearing number 6? Seeing none, Councilor McCollum.
Are we able to have Mr. Keltner come up and no? Okay. All right. Later then. Thank you.
Anyone else on council wish to be heard on the public hearing? Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion to close public hearing number 6. Moved and properly seconded. And any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman. Aye. Mr. Green. Aye. Ms. Hardison. Mr. Marshall. Aye. Mrs. Wiles. Vice Mayor McBroom. Mayor Mulder.
Aye. Public hearing 6 is now closed. 7, public hearing on ordinance number 4462 relating to item 10.6 on the agenda, amending ordinance 4400, the same being the zoning ordinance of the city of Columbia, Tennessee, regarding mobile vending. This is citywide. Anyone in the council or in the audience this evening wish to be heard on public hearing number 7? Hearing none, anyone on council wish to be heard on public hearing number 7? Seeing none, entertain a motion to adjourn public hearing number 7. So moved. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman. Aye. Mr. Green. Aye. Ms. Hardison. Mr. Marshall. Aye. Mrs. Wiles. Aye. Vice Mayor McBroom. Aye. Mayor Mulder.
Aye. That item is approved. Next, item 8, public hearing on ordinance number 4463 relating to item 10.7, an ordinance fixing the tax rate for the city of Columbia for the 2023 year on all taxable property at the rate of 0.8251 per 100. Anyone in the audience this evening wish to be heard on public hearing number 8? Hearing none, anyone on council wish to be heard on public hearing number 8? Seeing none, entertain a motion to close public hearing number 8. So moved. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman. Aye. Mr. Green. Aye. Ms. Hardison. Mr. Marshall. Aye. Mrs. Wiles. Vice Mayor McBroom. Aye. Mayor Mulder.
Aye. Public hearing number 8 is now closed. Next, public hearing 9 on ordinance number 4464 related to item 10.8. It's the appropriation ordinance for fiscal year July 1, 2023 through June 30, 2024. Any member of the audience wish to be heard on public hearing number 9? Hearing none, anyone on council wish to be heard on public hearing number 9? Seeing none, entertain a motion to close public hearing number 9. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll take the vote, please.
Mr. Coleman. Aye. Mr. Green. Ms. Hardison. Mr. Marshall. Aye. Mrs. Wiles. Vice Mayor McBroom. Aye. Mayor Mulder.
Aye. Public hearing number 9 is now closed. Next, 10, public hearing on ordinance number 4466 relating to item 10.10 on the agenda, an ordinance to amend the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget ordinance number 4404, providing for revisions to the general sanitation and wastewater funds. Anyone in the audience this evening wish to be heard on public hearing number 10? Hearing none, anyone on council wish to be heard? Seeing none, entertain a motion to close public hearing number 10. It's been moved by Councilmember Tony Green, seconded by Councilmember Danny Coleman. Any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman. Aye. Mr. Green. Aye. Ms. Hardison. Mr. Marshall. Aye. Mrs. Wiles. Aye. Vice Mayor McBroom. Aye. Mayor Mulder.
Aye. That public hearing is now closed. Final public hearing, number 11, related to second consideration of ordinance number 4467, related to item 10.11 on the agenda, an ordinance to amend Title 17, Chapter 1, Section 17108 of the Columbia Municipal Code, the same being the scheduling fees for the collection of garbage and refuse within the corporate limits of the city of Columbia. Anyone in the audience this evening wish to be heard on public hearing number 11? Hearing none, anyone on council wish to be heard on that public hearing? Seeing none, entertain a motion to close public hearing number 11. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman. Aye. Mr. Green. Ms. Hardison. Mr. Marshall. Aye. Mrs. Wiles. Aye. Vice Mayor McBroom. Mayor Mulder.
Aye. That public hearing is now closed. Okay, thank you everyone for bearing with us through those 11 public hearings. Again, it's a requirement that we do those. It's an important requirement nonetheless, but we do appreciate your patience because now we can transition to the reason that many of you are here with our regular meeting. We'd like to once again welcome all of you who are here tonight, those in person, and also those of you who may be watching on our YouTube live or watching sometime on a delay. We are grateful that you chose to tune in and watch things happening in the city of Columbia. You may notice that we all have some new hardware on our desks tonight, and some of you who have been coming to these meetings for the last several months know that over the last few months we've transitioned to a electronic voting method. And then this month we transitioned to electronic voting with actual hardware devices in front of us to do. So we ask that you bear with us. This is our first meeting using these devices, but so far so good. And it's always a good thing when we can lead to greater efficiencies of a governmental meeting. And that's what this will ultimately do, even if there are some road bumps along the way. So with that said, we'll now call to order tonight's meeting and ask the clerk to please take the roll.
Mr. Coleman.
Here.
Mr. Green.
Here.
Ms. Hardison. Mr. Marshall.
Here.
Mrs. Wiles.
Here.
Vice Mayor McBroom.
Here.
Mayor Mulder.
Here, let the record reflect all members of the Columbia City Council are present for tonight's meeting. We'll now move on to the invocation by Taylor All of the Belonging Co. We'd ask Taylor to come on up and thank him for being here. We'd ask you all to please stand as you are able. And if you'll please remain standing subsequent to the invocation for the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led tonight by Mr. Thad Jablonski. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, council members, for having me here. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, God, we just, first of all, we thank you for sending your Son, for dying for us, Lord, for sending a sacrifice for our sins, Lord, and advocating for us, God. And we just pray that your Spirit would be with us tonight as we make decisions that can be challenging, that can be hard. Lord, that you would just lead and guide us and help us to remember that the decisions we make are larger than ourselves, but that we represent you, God, that we would honor you, that we would look to you for supernatural wisdom, that you are a light for our path, God, and your word is a lamp unto our feet, and that we would just move in your Spirit tonight, that your supernatural wisdom would be on our minds, our hearts, and our mouths. God, I just pray a special blessing for Mayor Mulder, for Vice Mayor McBroom, God, and the council members and their families, that you would cover and protect them. Lord, that you would be with them, that you would give them the wisdom they need to make these decisions, and they would look to you for that wisdom. We thank you, God, in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Please turn and face the flag for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. All right, we'll move on now to Section 4, Approval of Agenda. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Mayor. In looking at the agenda, what we made a mistake in that Resolution 9.1 regarding the annexation resolution for the Trotwood development needs to be at the end of Section 11 on your agenda tonight. So we would ask that you move that item to Section 11.
Okay, so for Section 4, approval of the agenda, the request is for the agenda to be approved subject to the modification of Resolution 9.1 being moved to the conclusion of Section 11. So that's the request. Is there a motion to approve? So moved, properly seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, we will take the vote.
Mr. Coleman.
Aye.
Mr. Green. Ms. Hardison. Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McBroom. Mayor Mulder.
Aye. The agenda is approved as modified. Next up, we have presentations this evening. Only one presentation, that being the quarterly presentation by Will Evans of the Murray County Chamber and Economic Alliance. And I think maybe Will is here tonight with Travis Growth. And so both of them, as they make their way, we'll just say welcome and thank you both gentlemen for being here. And we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of council, I'm going to hand the mic over to Travis Growth, our Vice President of Economic Development. The main focus of his presentation will be a project he worked very hard on last year, presenting the results of our strike zone presentation, which we brought before you before. So I'll hand it over to Travis.
So thank you very much for this opportunity. And tonight we have a lot of data to share with you. So the first slide that you see is the May Economic Development Dashboard you're familiar with. Happy to say that our project pipeline remains strong and diverse. If you go to the next slide, please. One of the main things wanted to circle back with you this evening. You were kind enough to let us come last year and do what we called our strike zone exercise. The purpose of that was to gain feedback from you on what you felt a successful economic development projects should look like going forward. The community has had a period of growth, and that's been very productive. And we just want to make sure that our efforts going forward are aligned with our stakeholders and that our outcomes are aligned with our stakeholders as well. So we met with all of these different groups to receive their feedback. And then if you don't mind, go to the next slide, please. In front of you, you have the results both from Columbia City Council and then of all those different stakeholder groups combined. And if you remember the way this was approached, we kind of started with about 5 open-ended questions, tried to get some narrative from you, understand some of the nuance behind the thinking. And then we actually had some specific scenarios that we asked you to vote on so that we could capture data, and those were uniform across all stakeholder groups. And then we asked you a couple questions about top priorities. And rather than go through all the different scenarios, you have those in front of you. I thought I would just highlight a few places where the city council's results differed a little bit than the combined results. So I would say generally, your support of manufacturing projects was a little bit more supportive. You were a little bit more supportive of solar and green energy projects than the combined results. And like all the combined results, you ranked wages as your top priority, had a little bit stronger focus on job creation, but also aligned with the combined results, included appropriate use of utilities and infrastructure as a top priority. So next slide, please. And so, as we look to transition a little bit, if we're going to change the metrics of a focus away from capital investment and jobs, I wanted to start thinking about how we might measure success going forward. So we put together this draft KPI, and please do consider this in draft form. We would welcome your feedback and thoughts if you have any ways to improve it or recommendations. But, I think the fortunate thing is that the community really does seem to be trending in a very positive direction, almost any way that you measure it. And with that, I would stop here and happy to take any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Groth on that presentation? All right. Anything else, Travis? Is that good? Well, thank you for the presentation. I did think it was interesting to sort of go through the results of the strike zone survey to sort of see where there was some differences, and maybe I think that's a good thing to show that we do have some different thoughts that come together to sort of form the policy. So thank you, and I also appreciate the snapshot that you provided of the various community demographics and where our population is and the medium income and how that's changed over a 10-year period, and primarily for the positive. So thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, and if I could, I just, the KPI were meant really to try to measure 3 things. One, is the community growing? Is the community growing wealthier? And then is it educating and training the workforce that it needs going forward? So,
and by most all metrics, it is a positive.
Yes.
Agreeing. There's one red there that hopefully that there's some conversations in place, I think, even today, that we're going to start changing that trajectory.
Yeah, and sorry, one other thing I should flag for you, unless it's otherwise noted, that is 2021 data to be uniform and consistent. And so even the area that's red, that may be due directly to COVID. So.
Okay. Thank you. Good job. Councilmember Wiles has a question.
Just a quick few questions regarding your data, your KPI sheet. And of course, I'm looking intently at the bottom of the associate's degree or higher. Would you explain that 10-year change of almost 100%? Does that mean the population is increasing and having those particular degrees?
Yes, ma'am.
And does that relate then, if you look at your CTE concentrators, your ACT score, and your grad rate, which is somewhat stagnant or decreasing? How do those two go together?
Sorry?
How would those two go together as you're attracting industry? And is it taking a higher degree of qualifications while perhaps we're not meeting what we need to meet with regard to?
Well, and this KPI is really meant to be a dashboard, right? And so we can, yeah, you would want it. It's meant to flag, just like you're doing. You may identify an area and want to dig deeper. The data on the dashboard itself isn't granular enough to make determinations. It just can flag for you where you want to dig deeper.
We just noticed that's a pretty high percentage along with SS value. Thank
you. Yeah. Thank you.
Councilor Coleman.
It did end up happening. One, thank you for being here, Travis. On the average annual income, is that per person, or I guess how's that determined?
Yeah.
Figured.
So the source is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and that one is, and I'm not a data expert, so can't go too deep there, but that is basically for folks who are pulling a W-2. That won't include like private business owners and stuff like that. So that's why it can get very granular and detailed, and you can get in the weeds very quickly. And so that's why we tried to look at it from a bunch of different angles. And this is really just a way to flag, hey, is there something we should take a closer look at? Yeah.
So it's not necessarily indicative of what the average person is making in Murray County, or is that just?
That's right. It's not the median, right? It's an average. And then it's mainly only including those folks who are pulling a W-2. So again, you have to be very careful about trying to derive too much meaning from one statistic.
Definitely. And on a different note, is this the dashboard that we had talked about several years ago that you have here? This was great, by the way.
It is. It took a couple years to get it together. Yeah. So
did you end up working with the TSBDC at all to do it? Did they help?
No, they didn't actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, sorry to hear that, but I'm glad to see it.
Yeah.
Great work. Thank you.
Sure.
Travis, you didn't know we were going to take a deep dive into these numbers, but
well, I'm glad you're all interested in it.
I think it's because they are very interesting and shows some progress and also shows some room for improvement. I did not realize that the average annual income numbers were derived from W-2 filings, which makes a lot of sense, I guess, in order for them to come up with a number that's somewhat reliable. But I mean, even though it would, so therefore it's not truly indicative. But on the other hand, every other city or county that uses that number has the same, predicament in terms of who's not included and who is. So
right. I think, what we're trying to see is this gives us a way to look at trends and hopefully identify if a red flag pops up, let's start digging into that a little bit more closer. Is it a one-off cause? Is something that occurred, it was just for 1 year, it's not a 5 or 10 year trend, or is there a root cause here, a problem that we need to dig into?
My hunch is that 10-year change probably lags behind what the combined COLA would be for that same period, and you probably would prefer to be ahead of the cost of living increases. But Mr. Coleman, did you have another question?
One other thing, I just wondered if maybe either in the future or just some other time, is it possible for us to get like comparable cities so that we can kind of see how we stack up?
Yeah, no, that we anticipated that question kind of being the next one. And you're not the only one to ask for that. I think that's a very good request and something we should definitely do. We just wanted to make sure first in this draft that we had the right criteria to be looking at, and then figure out, okay, which peer communities should we be matching ourselves or benchmarking ourselves against. Yep.
Great.
Yeah, great question.
Very good. Councilor Hardison.
Yeah, so another great question. The plan right now would be to just update this annually because of the type of data being looked at. It doesn't really change more than year over year. So. Yes, I think is the short answer to that, but that's the focus of a different group or different task force. So I'm probably not the best person to answer that specific question. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Groth? Hearing none, thank you, Travis, for being here tonight, and Will also, thanks for joining them, and we appreciate y'all's continued good work.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, we'll move in now to section 7, the consent agenda. These are the items that are deemed non-controversial or requiring any additional. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. First, we need to move into items to section 6, organizational business. Also a non-controversial item. 6.1, approve the minutes of the May 11, 2023 City Council regular meeting. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Jablonski, take the vote, please.
Mr. Coleman? Aye. Mr. Green? Aye. Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Aye. Mrs. Wise? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye. Section 6.1 is approved. Item 6.1 is approved. Next section, consent agenda. This is these are the items that are deemed non-controversial, requiring no additional debate or discussion. So I'll read them out collectively, and we will vote on them collectively at the conclusion. Item 7.1, approve disbursements for the month of April 2023 in the amount of $5,346,348.15. Item 7.2, approve and authorize the disposal of surplus equipment. 7.3, approve the bid award to North American Fire Equipment Company Incorporated for turnout gear. Item 7.4, approve a reimbursement in the amount of $465,000 to Tamarack Land, Carter Station LLC for Summit at Carter Station subdivision in the city of Columbia, Tennessee, Ward 5. Item 7.5, approve and authorize the mayor to sign Amendment Number 2 to the State of Tennessee Department of Transportation contract for improvements at and around the intersection of Nashville Highway and Bear Creek Pike, Ward 5. Item 7.6, approve and authorize the mayor to sign Addendum Number 1 for professional services with Gresham Smith and Partners for the Nashville Highway Bear Creek Pike intersection project, Ward 5. Item 7.7, approve the change order to the agreement with Tree Works in the amount of $7,320. Item 7.8, approve and authorize the mayor to execute an amended agreement with Kimley Horn and Associates from January 31, 2023 feasibility study to the design phase of a splash pad in Fairview Park. I'll say it again, splash pad in Fairview Park, increasing the amount by $40,056 to $79,800. Item 7.9, receive and file cost of living adjustment for eligible retirees or beneficiaries of the City of Columbia Employees Retirement Plan. Item 7.10, approve the mayor to authorize the extension of the agreement with MSD Environmental Services, Inc. for a 1 month at the cost of $20,000 for the 1.0 meter belt press. 7.11, approve change order number 1, final, to close out the contract with SBW Constructors, LLC, J.R. Walford Contract 19-02. 7.12, approve amendment number 5, agreement for engineering service related to EPA AOC number CWA 04-2014-4752. Item 7.13, approve the City of Columbia's stop-loss group medical insurance premium with Sun Life Financial with an individual specific deductible of $150,000 and an aggregating specific corridor of $125,000 effective July 1, 2023, and authorize the mayor to sign any necessary documents. Final item under the consent agenda, 7.14, approve bid award to Native Instinct LLC for a 200 kW standby generator and 2 automatic transfer switches in the amount of $104,444.21. That is your consent agenda. It's been properly moved. There is a second. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? All right, hearing none, we'll take the vote on the consent agenda.
Mr. Coleman? Aye. Mr. Green? Aye. Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Aye. Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Aye. Mayor Mulder?
Aye, the consent agenda is approved. There being no items under Section 8, Administration. We'll move on now to Section 9, Resolution. Item 9.1 has been moved to the hill of the docket, so we'll move on now to item 9.2, Resolution 2324, a resolution to accept the streets and drainage improvements in Autumn Brook subdivision for ownership and maintenance. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on that item? Hearing none, we'll take the vote.
Mr. Coleman? Aye. Mr. Green? Aye. Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Aye. Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Aye. Mayor Mulder?
Aye. That item is approved. Next item, 9.3, Resolution 2335, a resolution to accept the streets and drainage improvements in Honey Farm Subdivision Phase 2, Section 9 for ownership and maintenance. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on that item? Hearing none, we'll take the vote, please.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Aye. Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 9.4, resolution number 2336, a resolution accepting a donation of 5 containment blankets designed specifically for electric and hybrid vehicles from General Motors to be utilized by Columbia Fire and Rescue. It's been moved and properly seconded. Item 9.4. Any further discussion on that item? Hearing none. Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 9.5, resolution number 2337, a resolution to accept ownership and maintenance of sewer improvements serving Baker Creek Place, Ward 3. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on item 9.5? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 9.6. Resolution number 2338, a resolution to ratify the City of Columbia's application for the FEMA Public Assistance Grant, accept the award, and authorize the mayor to execute documents related to accepting and administering the grant project.
Move for approval.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on that item? Hearing none. Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 9.7, Resolution 2339, tax corrections. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on item 9.7? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 9.8, Resolution number 2340, a resolution to accept a donation from the Murray Regional Healthcare Foundation to the Columbia Parks and Recreation Department in the amount of $1,000 for summer youth program expenses. It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on item 9.8? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 9.9, Resolution 2341, a resolution authorizing the execution of a single stream solid waste interlocal agreement with Marshall County for recyclable materials. It's been moved and properly seconded. Item 9.9. Any discussion on that item? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 9.10, Resolution number 2342, a resolution to accept ownership and maintenance of sewer improvements serving Citizen House Apartments, Ward 5.
Move for approval.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on item 9.10? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski, take the vote, please.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Final item under this section, 911, Resolution 2343, a resolution to accept ownership and maintenance of sewer improvements serving Ridgeview Oaks Phase 2. This is Ward 5.
Move for approval.
Been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on item 911? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Section 10, Ordinances. First up, item 10.1, second consideration of ordinance number 4456, an ordinance to amend ordinance 4400, the same being the zoning ordinance of the city of Columbia, Tennessee, by rezoning a portion of tax map 112, parcel 9, located at 6150 Trotwood Avenue, from CD2 to Planned Unit Development Residential Ward 1. This is item 10.1. And by the way, I do have the list that was provided of the sign-up list, and it appears as though everyone on the list that signed up to speak, other than the developers, have spoken during the public hearing. There was one name that was actually the first name that was not logged in to the system that is not able to be read, or I'm not able to read the name. So if you've signed up and haven't already spoken and would like to speak on item 10.1, now would be your time to do so. So is there?
I thought I signed up.
Yes, Mr. White, you are in the. Thank you, Mr. White. You're in the next screen of mine on my new computer system. I asked you at the beginning to bear with me, so I'm going to ask you to cast that in now. But yet again, I do have some individuals who have signed up to speak, some either who have already left and or have already spoken. So what I'm going to do is just go through the list. I think maybe is the best way to do it. And if you've already spoken and don't want to speak again, please let us know. So first one we have up here is Eric Pravetti. I believe he has already left. Next one we have up is Rusty Vest. I believe I maybe saw Rusty Vest also leave. Next one up is Jay Easter. Okay. So we have Jay Easter, Andrew Etheridge, Thomas Hutto. Oh, 10.12. Okay. We'll correct that, Mr. Hutto. We're glad you're here. We'll get to you when we get to you. Next up, Douglas Chapman. Mr. Chapman, you'll have the floor for 3 minutes if you'll introduce yourself, and we welcome you to City Hall.
All right, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, Mr. Vice Mayor, I appreciate y'all having us here today. I'm here in my individual capacity as a member of someone who lives in Ashwood Manor. If I could have everybody who is here in opposition to the old to this project, I have you to stand up for me real quick. All right. Thank you. I'll let y'all have a seat back down. As a neighborhood, not everybody who's here is from our neighborhood, but as a group, we decided that we were going to narrow down the number of people who were going to come in and talk, but we've got a lot of people who are here interested, trying to be respectful of all of y'all's times on that. From my perspective, recently we've had some safety issues that have happened out there. There have been 2 wrecks that have happened right out there in that stretch of road in the past week. Thankfully, there was no fatalities as a part of that, but it drew into some of our consideration that the fact there's no shoulder, there's no anything out there to be able to pull off to the side of the road. And then we're talking about going in and adding a lot more cars through this area. So I think that it would, I'm not sure if the police chief's here. I think I saw the fire chief. I don't know if either one of them might want to speak with regard to any kind of safety issue with the road out there with Trotwood. They might say it's perfectly good as is. I'm not an expert with regard to that kind of things. Also, I would also ask if that is something that y'all have a concern with, to defer our action here today, push it to a later date, let that be looked into. Is this a safety concern? Is that not a safety concern? This is a major thoroughfare to be able, people to be able to get to the hospital that's right there, and we want people to be able to get there safely. Additionally, I might ask y'all to consider deferring from today. If y'all say yes, we're ready to go ahead and do it, our numbers are close to how many houses there might be. I still think there's some room to be able to go through and maybe address where some of the houses are within the property out there. If y'all say, hey, this is our number, we're okay with it, whether it's this one or a different amount, I think that we could go through and potentially push some stuff around a little bit in there, have it a little more denser where it's closer into the city, have a little bit less dense where it's out there farther away from the city. And we've got some potential options that might even allow the builder to be able to build more houses quicker and thus get a quicker return on some of their investment, depending on how they do that. I would ask that there would be very specific language with regard to Yeatman Lane about what was not allowed to be able to connect on there. And then also, from what I heard from some of the previous matters that were out there, I know that, Mr. Vice Mayor, one of your concerns that you had out there was with regard to having that light out there right away coming in from the park. But I would want, if I was the city, I would want to have a lot more control over when those other lights might be going in, as opposed to a yearly appointment to come in, or yearly I'm not sure what you call it. Anyway, traffic study to be able to come in and for not having any control over what might or might not happen as a result of that. I think I just timed myself out.
You can finish your thought, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So there's a lot going on this, and as we've said, and I will be definitely complimentary of the builders that are here. We've talked with them, we worked with them. They've been very respectful throughout this process. I think that if this process goes through and they end up developing something out there, I think it'll probably be a good product out there with that. I don't have a doubt on that. But our main concern right now would be the additional safety issues that we saw out there, plus also potentially some consideration to shift some stuff around if we are at that number that the council is okay with. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chapman. And I have a question for Mr. Keltner regarding one thing Mr. Chapman said, but I think I'll wait until we get through the public comments to do that. But just so that you know, Mr. Chapman, I do have a question about something you said. Next up, John White. Mr. White, you'll come forward. You'll have the floor for 3 minutes if you'll introduce yourself, and thanks for being here.
John White in Ashwood Manor. I want to thank Mayor and Vice Mayor. Probably came out of this meeting on Ridley Park, how we got the ditch cleaned up where it's safe to come and pull out of there again now. I know we've talked about it at this meeting before. And I'm one that watches this video when I go to my vacation home, and sometimes the audio doesn't work. The video's there, but no audio. Just so FYI. And then I want to just talk about Yateman Lane. And I know we've had tons of discussion around Yateman Lane, and that's kind of like the end result. But I would be at the start. I don't ever want to see Yateman Lane be a construction entrance through that easement that is an easement. But we don't want any construction on Yateman Lane, and that's my big push. And hopefully we could get something like that in writing, as well as a sign at the front of our Ashwood Manor neighborhood that says no construction entrance, so there's no confusion, and get trucks and things back in there on our roads. Thank you.
Mr. White, a quick question for you. Is there a sign when you turn into Ashwood Manor that says no through traffic? Or is that sign already there?
No, there's not. I had gotten online and put a request through the Maury County Road Commission to put a no outlet sign there.
Or no outlet, right. Yeah,
and that hasn't happened yet. Okay. So hopefully it will happen.
All right.
That'll help us. Thank you.
All right. The next one on the list here, I have Gabe Howard. Mr. Howard, you're good. Thanks for being here tonight, Commissioner Howard. We always appreciate your presence. Next up, Mr. Michael White.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, and council members. Never thought I'd speak to this council twice in my life, but I appreciate you all's time. I'm here again. I'm with Ashwood Manor. I'm 6508 Breckenridge Cove. And I thought that we had got Yateman Lane resolved last month. So if we're not, I hope it does get resolved tonight. My other contention was the 1,500 plus cars plus, in the neighborhood and what it's going to do to Trotwood. To the mayor's point, he said, well, that's not going to all happen at once. Well, that reminded me of the parable of the frog in the water. It said if you put a frog in a boiling hot water, he'll jump out immediately. But if you put him in tepid water and just keep cranking it up a little at a time, he'll sit there till he boils to death. Well, we get 300 cars this year, another 300 or 400 next year. Before you know it, we've got those 1,500, 1,600, 1,700 cars that we're fearful of. I know, and I don't know his comment specifically, but Mr. Keltner, when asked about TDOT, there was nothing on the planning to do anything about Trotwood. And then you all's comments after that was, last month was, well, if there is something going to happen, your preference was Bear Creek Pike, not Trotwood. So we're still pushed in there with that 2-lane highway. To Mr. Chapman's point, there's only that 3 feet on both sides. If there is a flat tire, if there is an accident, there is no place to pull over. Then coming home today, I was on the old Zion extension, and there's not even 3 feet. There's 0. And that's going to be one of the places we're talking about proposing a traffic light. So there's nothing there. I sent a letter to you all about this, and there were, as he said, there were 2 wrecks just this past week. One of them was Sunday morning. I was heading to church, and we turned left, and we got turned around before we even got to Mr. Crichton's street. They had shut down Trotwood in both directions, so we had to turn around and go back. Again, the fire chief, police chief can address that better than I. But those are just in the last week. And that didn't even get into Ashwood Manor, didn't even get to Yeatman Lane, where we've had so many accidents in the past. Again, I hate to keep beating up these guys. This is not us versus them. It's residents of Columbia, fearful of the overcrowding. Right now, when we go see our grandkids or our kids in Spring Hill or Franklin, we have the option of going out a 2-lane highway at Bear Creek, or go through the mess in Neapolis and then Spring Hill, Murray County, and then Spring Hill, even worse, Spring Hill, Williamson County. I hate that. Or our third option is the road rally called Carter's Creek. And that used to be a great secret, but a lot more people are finding that out. And so now we've got more competition there. But I hope that you will consider, reducing the density of this, which in turn helps us in our traffic concerns. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Next on the list, Randy Notley. Mr. Notley, hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. All right, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. First off, can everybody hear me? It's very difficult. I'd like to make a comment. Some of us are hard of hearing. It's very hard when people don't use their microphones. I don't know if this one's loud enough, but I have a hard time hearing these meetings. You're the only one I've heard, Mr. Mayor, clearly tonight at all. And everybody who's speaking here is speaking with their back to the audience. So just a comment about maybe getting the volume up for everybody here.
Thank you.
Basically, I want to make some comments about the infrastructure that we're all facing in the county here. More and more annexation, development on both the city and the county side are just putting enormous stresses. I'm probably speaking to the choir here, put enormous stresses on all the first responders in this area. I hope I can speak for the city in as a parallel of issues that we're having with more and more traffic. Last weekend, for example, now I'm a division chief at County Fire. We were on 20 accident calls in a day and a half in the county last weekend. I'm sure the city, I don't hear all of theirs, but I'm sure they have an equal amount when we have a storm come through. That's a stress on everybody, a stress on EMS. They got to respond to all of those. Fire has to respond to them, law enforcement. That kind of growth is very expensive to everybody. Again, I'm probably preaching to the choir on that, but I don't think everybody's aware of that, how much it ultimately costs all the taxpayers here. Sheriff's having to expand for SRO program now. Lots of new people there. I'm sure the city's law enforcement is stressed with the growth as well. So those are my main concerns. I'm not going to beat a horse here, but I want everybody to keep thinking about those infrastructure problems. It's not only our roads, schools, all of our first responders are taking a beating out here, and it's tough. It's tough. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Notley, for being here this evening. And then the last individual that I have here is Sherry Hawley. Ms. Hawley, you will come up and introduce yourself. You'll have the floor for 3 minutes, and thank you for being here.
It's Cheryl Hawley. Sorry, my writing was.
Sorry about that.
Anyway, thank you for allowing me to speak. I just want to, of course, echo everything that's already been said about the roads. And I want to ask you a question. Have you not learned from Spring Hill? And number two, when do you say no? I'd like for that to be tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Hawley. That is everyone that I have on my computer list other than Jay Easter and Andrew Etheridge. But are there any other members of the audience that believe they signed up to speak on item 10.1, which is also items pertaining to 10.1 through 10.5 that I have not called on, that's not had an opportunity to speak? Okay, seeing none. Commissioner? We'll allow it.
I'm directly affected because I'm at 6058 Trotwood Avenue. I'm Connie Green. I am a county commissioner. This is my district we're talking about. The one thing, I was going through your new plan, city planning, document and was reading it very closely. And I think one of the interesting things it says is this property in the area of change, and it says no because we're listed as a suburban area, but it says new dwellings and structures must be compatible with the established character of the area. And I'm assuming that's Ashwood Manor. I'm also reading on Trotwood, you have something, you're going to look at a right turn lane near Casey Lane. You're going to look at a right turn lane near Graymere and Neely's. And you have safety concerns on Ridley Park and Trotwood. And then it says widening will be 4 lanes from Camelsville Pike to Rutherford Lane in 10 to 20 years. I have a concern. I don't think that you're going to get to widen it, but I just am concerned that we're not meeting the standards that you're setting up in your own documents. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. All right. So now we will go to Jay Easter and Andrew Etheridge. Jay?
Yes, sir. Thank you all for having us again. We've been here multiple times to discuss this project. We've been back and forth with Planning Commission, with staff, and with City Council and made amendments and changes throughout the life of this project. I've heard traffic spoke of multiple times tonight. There are multiple traffic improvements that are going to happen along with this project if we're fortunate enough to get approved. I have the full team back here behind me to address any of the... Am I on the mic now? Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. The full team with me tonight to address the Commission's questions. We look forward to your favorable approval. I'm not going to go back through the presentation again because y'all have seen it multiple times and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I do have a copy, I believe, at the work session that was asked for about the agreement to perform work pertaining to the Yateman Lane connection and the discussion that happened at the work session when I was not here. That has been emailed to staff, but I have printed copies to hand out if they're needed, if the council has not seen them.
I've received it, but you might want to hand it to the officer just in case, and he can pass it out. Jay, can you briefly summarize the traffic improvements just so that we're all aware of exactly what those improvements are before we take a vote tonight?
Yes, sir. If you don't mind, I'd like to get the exhibit that I can point to. And so, all right. So traffic, Tyler, help me so I can see it over here. Traffic improvements include 4 red lights that will be installed, 1 at the main entrance. We have agreed to build the main entrance all the way to Ridley Park and install the traffic light as part of Phase 1 is one of the conditions we've been asked for. There is a new traffic light at, I believe it's Zion Extended. There's a new traffic light in Mount Pleasant. We've met with Mount Pleasant and discussed that light. We've also discussed with them the compatibility with equipment between Mount Pleasant and Columbia, which can be achieved. And then there's reprogramming of a light further in towards Columbia to help it synchronize with the other traffic lights. We are also adding turn lanes at our main entrance and improving the lanes and shoulders along our frontage. We have turn lanes and road improvements at I believe that's Old Zion, and then Old Zion Extended. We also have a improvement up here on Lawrenceburg Highway with the J-turn that is similar to the one in along the roads in other places. These have all been vetted with staff and reviewed.
And at the last meeting, you updated us on the conversations and communications with the city of Mount Pleasant, and I think as we all learned, Mount Pleasant was very pleased to hear that they would be receiving this light, primarily because apparently it's been something that they've wanted and felt like they've needed for quite some time. I understand the reluctance to install that during the initial phase at Ridley, but I also feel as though there's an opportunity to go ahead and alleviate some of the safety concerns that are already there. and maybe even start encouraging for vehicular traffic turning out of Ashwood Manor or other parts of that roadway to turn to head in the south direction instead of north. So at least I know for me, I would like to see the Mount Pleasant Light as a part of phase one.
We can do that.
All right. Any other questions for Jay Easter at this time, based upon what he said? Vice Mayor McBrim.
When your project is all through and done, I'm looking at this right, you can leave. You do not have to get on Trotwood to get on the bypass.
That's correct.
You can go all the way through the subdivision and hit Old Zion Road and get the bypass.
Yes, sir.
And let's see, when was that? Do you remember what phase that was?
1 second and I can tell you. See, that would happen by the end of the sequence of phase two, the phase twos, but there are multiple phase 1 and 2.
World spins right, it'd be almost up to the end of the second year.
I think it may be a little longer than that.
In the third year. I was just wondering how quick people can get out of there without having to hit Trotwood. So they'll be able to go through their subdivision and hit Old Zion and get out.
I think if counting this upright, that will probably take at least 5 years.
5 years.
Yes, sir.
Before you get to that point of phase two.
Before you get to that point of phasing, depending on the market and how homes sell.
Okay. Vice Mayor. Mm-hmm.
Now, the phasing is following how the sewer can get in here as well. It's not just the road connections.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilor McCollum.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to see if you would speak to the construction and what it will look like as far as construction traffic, entrances, things like that.
I can promise you that Yeatman Lane will not be a construction entrance, and there will be a do not non-construction entrance sign put in front of their neighborhood. The construction entrances for the neighborhood will be identified on the preliminary plats as they come through, but Yeatman Lane will not be a construction entrance.
Right, so there won't be any vehicles that would be going into the existing neighborhood.
Right. That's correct.
Great.
There will be no vehicles going into their neighborhood to access this property.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then also, can you speak again to the construction timeline? It was a 10-year project, is that correct?
Right now, it's looking at, we have it projected out for 10 years. But now that will be after we start construction. So we will still have another year to year and a half to get through construction drawings and approvals and come back in front of the Planning Commission for phase 1.
And I know that not everybody has the timeline, and I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but there is a number of homes being built fairly equal throughout the years, or is that any particular year clustered?
It's fairly equal. It ranges anywhere from about 80 to 50 homes per phase.
Roughly, and each phase is about roughly a year?
Roughly a year, yes, sir.
So 50 to 80 homes per year, on average?
On average.
Okay. That is all the questions that I had for the developer. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Jay Easter? I think what's being passed out now is the breakdown of the phased projects, beginning with phase 1A all the way through phase 3B. Thank you for sharing that. No other questions for Jay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Easter. And then did Andrew want to provide any additional comments? Okay.
Yeah.
So any further questions at this time for the developers? Councilmember Hardison. Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions for the developer? Hearing none. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We're here if y'all need us.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Hardison.
This might be something for Mr. Keltner if he's here.
Good. Paul, could you come up, please?
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. Just a quick question. Since this is a potential 10-year project, is there any time during the phases where we would do an additional traffic study, or it's just one and done?
This proposal here has multiple traffic studies that would be done each year throughout the phases to make sure the background traffic, so that Trotwood Avenue or any of the supporting road systems do not increase faster than the assumptions that we've placed on that. So if something needs to be adjusted throughout the development, it will pick up during those annual traffic studies.
Thank you.
That's a good question, Councilmember Hardison, by the way. I think it's important to know that we're going to follow that. Now, I guess theoretically, the only thing that the traffic study that result in the interim would tell us would basically be speeding up the improvements that are required under the plan. And by that point, presumably at a minimum, they would at least have 2 traffic lights that would have already been signalized and installed and in operation, right?
Yes, sir, that is correct. So each time that number changes, it would trigger a different improvement throughout the process, which is laid out in their study.
The question I had for you, Mr. Keltner, on this, and Mr. Chapman, is sort of what made me think about it. And then I thought I had it answered, but then now I'm second guessing myself. But he had mentioned the different locations and maybe having opportunities down the road to suggest that there be some differentiation of how the layout is, which I think probably when it gets to that stage might be unlikely at best for that to occur. But if it's approved tonight by this body, this is second consideration. So this would be the final time that this body would have any vote relative to the project. But there would be some additional requirements, obviously at the staff level, that the developers would essentially be working with staff for the next until April of 2033. But are there any additional, or what are the additional approvals that would be required to come before the Planning Commission relative to various phases of the project?
So for the Planning Commission, it would be the next phase in the project would be for the preliminary plat. The preliminary plat is laying out the more specific details of the infrastructure in regards to physical utilities, as well as laying out the exact lot dimensions that you're seeing looked at here, but they're going to be down to a 2 decimal type placement, so they're pretty exact. At that point, they're free to submit their site construction plans to staff to review in further detail. Then they would end up getting a land disturbance permit, starting that construction. Once the site for that first phase, has up to a certain point with regards to construction, which for us, it's all the infrastructure installed, including the binder of the road. They can then come to the city planning commission with a surety for the remaining portion and with their final plat to then be able to start pulling building permits at that time.
So the plat plan approval, the preliminary plat plan approval and the final plan approval, that is only done in incremental phases. So theoretically, they would come and get approval for phase 1A, which would be their next stop in terms of in front of a governmental body. They'd have to come back to the planning commission. It sounds like they're probably a ways away from that. And before phase 1B were to begin, they would have to come back to the planning commission to get approval for that preliminary plat and site plan. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Preliminary plats are done at a much larger scale. So you may see the preliminary plat for the entire development, but then they would come in pieces for the final plat itself. So it would be phase 1A for the final plat, phase 1B for the final plat that you see in your phasing plan there in front of you.
And at those various stages of approvals, the developer would have the ability to have a modified plan for compared to what we're seeing tonight, which is just sort of a sketch as to what could work there based upon the zoning allowances. Is that right?
There are some deviations planning commission is allowed to look at throughout the plan as far as small amendments to the plan. If there's something at a larger amendment, there are triggers in there that would send it back to city council. But if a lot line was to move 5 feet, 10 feet this way, that type of thing, that would be within their preview of planning commission. They could approve that or have the applicant stick with the master plan.
If they're reducing density in one of the phases because of various conversations and or market conditions is calling for some maybe different, they would be allowed to do that subject to the approval of the planning commission, and so long as there's not been any change to the zoning classification that it currently is.
A reduction, yes, sir. There is a threshold to increase. I believe it's 3%. They're not allowed to increase by more than 3%. If so, it has to come back to city council.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Keltner. Don't go far. We might have, or does anyone else have any questions, Mr. Kellner? We do have two, but we'll start with Councilmember Cullen.
Is anybody from wastewater here? Donnie's out there?
Donnie?
Oh. I guess I need wastewater.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
The question I have is, the city of Columbia, I'm gonna read it off, it's easier. City of Columbia wastewater system indicate flow monitoring will be required if the applicant's is spent. It's likely that the gravity lines in the area will require major upgrades in order to serve the development. They have to do all that before you sign off on the preliminary plat.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay.
We have to know that there is room for that.
Okay. So they are still at their own risk.
Yes.
They have to do what you tell them to do.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
That's where we're going.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Keltner, you can get your steps in.
Paul, if you come back, please.
Thank you. I have a couple questions for you. So the first one being, can you speak to the future, or rather, I guess the current right-of-way availability on Trotwood? Are you familiar with that number? Because I've heard some numbers tonight. And I know we've heard them before. Are you familiar with how much right-of-way is there on Trotwood on either side?
I have not seen a survey on the actual right-of-way width for Trotwood itself.
Because that would be something that would slow down any potential future expansion, correct? Because we'd have to acquire that land from property owners.
Just looking at it at a glance, yes, you would end up having to go through the appraisal process and then the acquiring of the land process, similar to what we're doing now with the Bear Creek interchange right now, to acquire that property in order to increase that right of way. But when we talk about right of way, is that just a single lane for just a turn lane down the middle, or are we talking about going to 4 lanes? So there's can be varying degrees of right of way width that's needed there, and I'm just not familiar with the total right of way all the way through Trotwood to be able to speak intelligently on that.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. As far as the traffic study, we already know that there's the light improvements. And actually, you know what? That question was already asked by Councilman Hardison, so I'm good on that one. The Yateman Lane, can you clarify the Yateman Lane, where we landed with that? Because I think we've heard a couple different things said tonight, and I was going to make sure we hear from you what our current plan is for the Yateman Lane non-connection.
Sure. So when it came from Planning Commission, it actually was a recommendation for it not to be included. The second on the motion was to at least reserve the possibility for it to be done in the future. So when it came to City Council, but at the same time, that motion was made under the pretense that that it be brought up, that staff bring it up during council meeting itself for further discussion. And that's what happened in your first reading. So while it came before you with recommendation of approval without the connection, those caveats were put inside that motion, and that's what happened at your first reading. During your first reading, there was quite a bit of discussion and a lot of different options discussed at that time, but it looks like it was settled upon that it had to take 80% of the residents of the subdivision itself to approve the connection, at which time the connection is not to be built right now. Only the right-of-way itself is to be labeled to be platted, and then the applicant is required to build it up to 1 year after the last certificate of occupancy is granted within the subdivision itself, should that change during that period. So if their schedule stays the same, somewhere down the line of 10 to 11 years from now, that road could be built. And then after that time point, it would be upon the city to make a decision on if that was to ever change and be constructed.
Right. So it's clear that the ability to create that lane is going to be only triggered by the property owners on Yateman Lane, correct? 80% of them would have to approve that?
That is correct. That was part of your motion. Yes, sir. The 80%.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Of the subdivision of the whole, not the road. That will come up during discussion, not Yateman Lane, but of the subdivision as a whole.
Right. And then my last question is if you can speak to the conformity to the comprehensive plan. I know this is obviously an annexation, and what oftentimes comes up, as Commissioner Green mentioned, is the conformity to the comp plan, the area of change and whatnot. Of course, when something gets annexed, it's kind of brand new. So can you speak, I guess, to how much does this conform to our comprehensive plan, first and foremost?
It would. So your current comprehensive plan for this is suburban neighborhood, which does allow for that particular district inside of it, along with a few others, but that is one of them. The area change mentioned earlier was talking about the development pattern. The development pattern in this area is civic space being the park, as well as single-family homes being some of the more rural homes, and then the existing subdivision there at Ashwood Manor there. So this this request is an extension of that development pattern being single-family homes, and they have their own civic space within inside of it as well.
So then this does conform to our comprehensive plan?
Yes, sir. In staff's opinion, it does.
Okay, great. I believe that was it for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
One more.
Vice Mayor.
Oh, sorry. With what Councilman Coleman was saying about these easements, I've in the past, when sometimes these preliminary plats are coming through, people are still fighting for easements. How do we make sure, I mean, they're not starting this thing and they don't have all their easements? We won't sign off on it. Y'all will know. Like, I mean, I'm assuming I know at Trotwood, we had a problem getting easements for Ridley Park. That's why there's no light at Ridley's entrance, correct now?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
So how do we make sure, they're doing all the work, they start this work, and all of a sudden they don't have all the easements? And then all of a sudden we're pressured to figure something out. Can we make that improve that situation? Make sure they own before the preliminary plat's passed. When y'all see the drawings, do you have the easements? If they don't pass it?
Yes, sir. That's the way it would work. So at the preliminary plat, they're outlining what they're going to construct and also how it's going to be done. At that time, they have to provide the documentation that they have acquired any easements that are needed. They will have it at that time.
All easements?
That's yes, sir.
Sewer, water, everything?
Yes, sir.
All right. They
Yes,
can't
sir.
go back on a poor residential lady later on and say, I want to buy an easement.
Yes, sir. And I guess I should stipulate that comes in more on the site construction plan. So for your land disturbance permit, where we really get into just the fine elevations of everything in there, we don't release those until we have all those items in place.
Thank you.
And Mr. Kellner, I have a question, and I know the city attorney does as well, and I think my question may be along the same, at least topic, but it's with regard to Yateman Lane and the access. I think I heard you say to Mr. Coleman that the motion at Planning Commission was made to approve the project with no access to be provided. And then there was a second, and I know I was probably either the motion or the second, so it's sad that I can't remember where I was or what happened. But there was a second that was made that basically wanted to carve the right to potentially create an extension down the road. And so ultimately, I guess I'm confused as what the status came from. What are we receiving from the Planning Commission?
Yes, sir. So the motion was made subject to, Mayor Motor, you made the motion to approve, subject to technical or development review comments. And Mr. Hutto seconded that motion. At that time, Mr. City Engineer, Glenn Harper, intervened and asked for clarification with regards to the motion because the connection was actually in those comments. All the other items in that development review comment were either statements of our current standards or had already been addressed by their resubmittal at that time of Planning Commission. So that was the only item sitting in there that really needed to be looked at which time you came back and you clarified your motion and restated your motion that it did not include the connection and made the statement that that was the only thing that the two parties seemed to agree upon is not having the connection, but that you had made suggestion to staff to bring it up during Planning Commission, at which time Mr. Hutto reconfirmed his second motion, but he then also made the statement that he would like to see the possibility of that connection to still be available in the future, which then the vote took place at a 4-2.
Council.
Yes, sir. Which then during the first reading of council, that's pretty much how it came up, was from that request from Planning Commission.
Well, I was thinking that I sort of caused some of the confusion on the issue, and so that's why I was trying to figure out how I could try to clean it up. But I mean, I've looked at this agreement to perform the work, and I don't know, I almost just feel as though it's becoming to a point where we're sort of overcomplicating it, and I do have some concern about how we can enforce it, or you know, I was for the opportunity for connectivity down the road wanting to preserve the right for the Ashwood Manor residents who might not live there today and might not understand or see or appreciate the value of having that connectivity, but not necessarily being punitive to the future residents of Ashwood Manor who would want the opportunity to avoid Trotwood Avenue and go through and get to the bypass a roundabout way. But I don't know. This seems like this is a pretty tangled web way to do it. But Mr. City Attorney, I don't know if that was the topic you wanted to discuss.
Well, what I wanted to point out was the first 4 items are zoning items. The Yateman Lane item technically does not need to come up in those first 4. It needs to come up in number 5 when we get to the PUD approval. Because that's laying out the technical aspects. So it's fine to have that discussion right now, but it doesn't need to be a part of any motion until we get to item number 10.5.
Okay. And thank you for the clarification, but I just know that I want to make sure I'm comfortable with that final outcome before I vote on item 10.1. So, Mr. Kellner, can you just tell us why it is that staff would come with the request that there be the connectivity? I mean, I think most of us know, but it might be worth at least pointing out. I mean, it's not that that's just something that y'all just decide you want. I mean, there's some background to that, correct?
No, sir. Yes, sir. So all of your guiding documents, it's one of the base items that it looks at is the connectivity is one of those founding structures of how you build your community. We're charged with that staff is to not look at just only an individual street, but also to look at all streets and look at the entire community, not just necessarily one subdivision. While we do look at that type of scenario, but in the end, we're also looking out for down the line of how this community grows. So we all the time think about what would our community look like now if 7th Street was just a cul-de-sac, or 6th Street or North Main Street. So you're always looking at what are we going to hand off to the future? So the integration, not only from an automobile perspective, but also a social integration of neighborhoods have been proven to show that you have a stronger community when you have those connected. And that's why we wanted to at least have the opportunity to do that. If a house is built there, then we've lost that opportunity without great expense to buy a piece of property, tear it down, and then construct a road at a later date is some of the things we look at. So when you look at subdivisions, you'll notice as we have stub roads, it's not new. When you look at some of our older subdivisions, they all have stub roads as well. But somewhere in the 80s, we started going away from that and started going into cul-de-sacs. And now we feel like we're starting to pay the price for that. And we're trying to get back to what our city was originally founded upon, more of a grid system for future growth. We've been very blessed to have that, and we've prospered on that. So we want to try to continue that pattern.
Mayor, can I say one other thing? I probably ought to keep my mouth shut, but I don't have a dog in this fight. Most of our other connectivity issues are between areas within the city. This is between an area that would be within the city if you annex and an area that would remain in the county. So that, that is another factor to consider in this situation. I don't know if the Ashwood Manor people would ever ask to be in the city. So you would be connecting an area outside the city to the city. And most of our connectivity, I think it's fair to say, is within city to city.
But I'm sorry. We do look at it though as it's all publicly funded roadways, right? So
I understand.
We've made the statement before that it's fairly unfair for the rest of the community to fund a road for basically be a private driveway for just a few residents. So it should be open for all residents to use that road system.
What were you going to ask me, Mayor?
Well, I mean, is there a way to preserve the easement without it being built on? I mean, and is that even worth doing? I mean, maybe the risk that it could be is that ultimately it would have a connection, and that's not solving the problem of the Ashwood residents here tonight that are, some of which seem to have, made that their top concern. That, I'm trying to figure out a way to provide some.
I think the question arose when we started discussing who's going to pay for the road.
Right.
My suggestion would be, just let them leave the easement and leave the lot. Don't do anything other than that. And then if the Ashwood folks 20 years from now decide they want to connect it, let them connect.
But who would
Otherwise,
have
it'd
that
never-
right, though, Tim, to do it at that time?
They would. It would be
who?
their expense, and they could do
The
it.
Ashwood residents?
Yes. I think the question arose because of the city wanting to try to require this developer to pay for it and trying to find a way to do that. And quite frankly, the Ashwood residents do not want it. And they may never want it. And we may be talking about something that's just an exercise in attrition, but if it is built on, it will never happen, period. If you just leave a vacant lot, which the developer says they're willing to do, each of the two adjoining property owners, I'm sure, will usurp that land and maintain it themselves. And then you've got that land there if it's ever changed and somebody eventually down the road wanted to connect the neighborhood.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
But it's
Don't
it's
do
not my
that. I
call.
mean, when we get around to that 5.5, don't do the easement. They don't want it. Don't put it in. Don't do it. It's that simple. It's that simple. Not to clapping, but that doesn't do anybody any good to clapping. So, but they don't want it.
So are you saying allow
Just-
for a house to be built on it?
Yeah, just let a house be built on it. They don't want it, put a house on it and go from there. I mean, the way it looks right now, it could just be one more house. And then it'd be all common area behind it. They will take care of it. 'Cause I've gotten in the problem with easements. I've had easements on some subdivisions. I go through the easement. Everybody goes crazy. You didn't tell me. They get attorneys involved. It's never going to be positive.
No.
Never. So just let them put a house there, get rid of the easement. They got more common space there. Don't have to worry about anything. I got one more question for the developer, if he doesn't mind.
All right.
Please.
Come forward, please.
On the park, I just now realized I'm looking at the drawing of how the subdivision's laid out.
Okay.
You've got a pink star that says park connection. What is that? And it's got an easement.
I believe that's a trail connection to the park, but let me look at the plan.
Oh, okay. All right, that's what it is. Just a
Are you
sidewalk.
Are you talking about on the north end of?
Yeah, right where it says underneath park connection.
Yes, sir. That's
just a
where
sidewalk?
that's just a
Sidewalk.
trail connection to the park.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
So they'll have a way to get into the park besides.
Yes, sir. Besides
Now
getting in,
that comes to Mac. Oh, you opened up some more this conversation. Will that trail always be open? I mean, will that access always be there, or will Mac close it? Will the parks people close that access to the park?
that would be up to Michael.
Okay. So this is one thing some people have said is this is supposed to have been a softball park, and after all of a sudden we're gradually turning it into everybody use it park.
Okay.
So he would have the decision if he wants these people, even though you got your park at park.
That's
parks,
correct.
He can keep people from going in there and playing on the playground in there, because they're not going to have any staff in. I mean, I don't know what they're staffing, but
No. They would
that'll
only
up to
be
him.
able to access the park when the park is open for operation.
Okay, all right. That'd be the city's, okay. And then it looks like you've got it worked out, a parking area, and you have a little trail where we can get back to in the back. And then you've got another indication of when the park is open, you've got another connection.
Yes, sir.
You've got right there, but, all right, thank you. But, I mean, I think y'all know my opinion on this. Just get rid of the easement. Simple, done.
Well, and I'll say, I mean, I have evolved on it as well. And actually, I think I finally evolved today when I got the agreement and just see how complicated it is. And I mean, I would like to think that I was trying to sort of fight for the future Ashwood Manor resident here. But at the end of the day, perhaps a little bit greater credence should be played to the current Ashwood Manor ownership that's here. And in addition to the just seemingly complex web that's created, I think, Vice Mayor, I'm with you on that issue. Mr. Tischer, you told us already that any motion relative to Yateman Lane needed to be reserved for item 10.5, I believe.
That's correct.
I think
and I think it would, since there was discussion about it previously, I think when if the earlier motions are approved and we come to a motion on 10.5, I think we need to specifically state one way or the other how that needs to be addressed so that there's no doubt.
All right, and then which item should include a motion relative to the traffic signalization and the timing of that? Is that also 10.5? Okay. Okay, so we're now back on item 10.1 for second consideration. Would anyone wish to make a motion on that? Councilman Marshall.
Yes, I would like to hear the fire chief's thoughts on the highway.
Chief Cobb.
Mayor, members of council, I did submit the plan of services that addresses the development in itself. What the plan of services doesn't address in detail would be the Trotwood Avenue and emergency response, like I've heard from some of the residents this month and last month. I do understand their concerns with the shoulders, with Trotwood Avenue being a 2-lane road. If you think back towards Neely's Mill, and I'm thinking about emergency response, and the sides of the roads, and there's a turning lane, emergency vehicles can maneuver pretty well. When you get to Ridley Park, Yeatman Lane, the road really gets narrow, and there's maybe 2 feet shoulders. I was looking at the map as well. So it is harder for emergency vehicles to get around. I think about the residents, if there is a vehicle that maybe is broke down, they would be in the way of traffic. So if it's a mother in a minivan and she's broke down with a flat tire past Ridley Park, she's going to be in the way of traffic. And that is a safety issue to me. I think we need to have the shoulders like they are at Brookside Drive, where they're at least 5 feet and they can get off the road safely. The 2 wrecks that I heard mentioned earlier, there was a wreck Friday. I did receive phone calls about that wreck. There was also a wreck Sunday. The wreck Friday, I did review the incident report, and I did see the pictures, and I saw how that accident was covering the whole roadway. In fact, one vehicle was off the 2-foot shoulder, kind of in the ditch. That is concerning to me. I think that needs to be addressed. I think public safety is a top priority, and I do have concerns with that part of the roadway. We do back up Mount Pleasant on automatic aid. Mount Pleasant backs us up on automatic aid in Station 4's area. So from fire, police, EMS, we travel Trotwood Avenue a lot. You know, we've done all we could to reduce our response times with our GPS signalization. And I do endorse the traffic signalization at Polk Lane and Trotwood Avenue. I think that is needed. We need to get control of the traffic as they pull out in front of other cars. We have a lot of accidents there. So I guess it gets back to the importance of Trotwood Avenue being the proper width. And that's my own common sense observation and listening and watching and reviewing the call volume. And if we do add these homes, we know based off data that drives daily decision making that accidents and accidents with injuries will increase. So that's where I feel about this, and I feel like we do need to address Trotwood Avenue. And I know that takes state help too, but imagine in my world if everybody would slow down, how many calls I could reduce and how many lives we could save. I'll take any questions that you might have.
Councilman Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Cobb. What about the lights that are going in? Do you feel like those will mitigate any of the traffic concern or the accident concerns that you're talking about?
I definitely think that it will reduce accidents at the Polk Lane, Trotwood Avenue there at the Mount Pleasant, Columbia city limits. I know at times on Saturdays with Ridley Park, we have a lot of traffic. We can have a lot of teams in and out of that entrance. But again, if you visualize the whole Trotwood Avenue from the time you leave here, we have 3 lanes in front of Station 4 at the food line. Where we don't have 3 lanes, we at least have 4 to 5 foot shoulders. And I did review that this week, especially following the accidents that have happened that I received calls on. So traffic signalization does help, especially at the Polk entrance. That is very highly traveled, and there's a rise actually, as I reviewed it, as you pull on from Polk Lane trying to turn right by St. John's Church. That can be very hard.
Do you feel like those abate your fears, your concerns that you're expressing, or do you feel like is that sufficient in your mind to mitigate these accident concerns, or do you feel like it's still there because of the shoulder issue?
So on the spot, I go back to my experience in being in this job 25 years.
We depend on that.
I will tell you that, again, Trotwood Avenue, 2 lanes with no shoulders or no middle lane, there's going to be issues because 80,000-pound fire truck responding to Mount Pleasant or responding to this development has to be able to maneuver. The last thing we want to do, and this goes for every emergency department running emergency traffic, is run people off the road. So they're trying to get off the road for our safety, but we're pushing them off the road onto where there's not a shoulder. You follow me? So I have to have empathy for the residents in that area and those traveling the highways that we need to keep them safe too.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Well, I would just say, I mean, Chief, I have not seen that concern raised in any of your previous reports that we had at Planning Commission relative to the shoulder width. I mean, I know that's become a topic of concern in the last couple of weeks, but I mean, this is the first time that at least I'm hearing you speak of that concern.
So the plan of services addresses the development. I have not been asked about the Trotwood Avenue.
But if you had concern about your ability to safely access emergency, I mean, to me, that's something that should be considered in what the report is that you're providing to the Planning Commission and the City Council that we're relying upon. To now, all of a sudden, on the second consideration, you bring up a concern that, you know, heretofore has not been one that we've heard you express. So are you saying tonight that because of the width of the road, you do not believe this project presents a safe option for us to move forward as a city council? Because that's what I'm thinking I'm hearing you say.
I'm telling you that Trotwood Avenue needs to be addressed. The development in itself is a good development. I have no problems with the development, as the plan of services says. What I do have concerns about is Trotwood Avenue and a 2-lane highway with 2 feet shoulders.
So how do you handle that now? When you're accessing Trotwood Avenue?
I think you have to be very careful with developments in areas where there's 2-lane roads with no shoulders.
All right. Any other questions for Chief Cobb?
Oh, I would just like to add, I think you raised a good point, Mayor, is just that hopefully that we can have that included in as far as transportation or Trotwood Lane, the way that factors in, having that perspective factored in on all developments, I know I would definitely appreciate. And I don't know, maybe there's some general improvements to that, how we do that report. I guess would that be planning's purview? Planning Commission, or sorry, planning, city planning?
I think the developer like.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Mr. One of the developers wants to be heard on that topic.
Yes, sir. Now, Commission, we are making improvements to Trotwood, and we are making shoulder improvements along our frontage of Trotwood. We're through with this project, so the condition will improve. Now, we can't correct all of Trotwood.
Can you explain those shoulder improvements?
There will be a shoulder along our side of the road on our frontage after we finish the road improvements that we're doing on Trotwood.
How many feet wide?
Whatever the city engineer tells us to do, he'll have to approve our roadway improvement plans along with TDOT.
And Mr. Keltner, what will that requirement be? Do you know? How many feet of a shoulder will be created And it's just this is the shoulder that is contiguous to your development.
To our property, where we
Right,
have
your property.
where we're dedicating additional right of way.
You're referring to just the improvement side or just for the entire Trotwood itself? I'm okay.
This is our entrance. We'll have a shoulder along our frontage along top. And then there'll be shoulders on both sides of the road where we're doing road improvement.
All the way across the front.
Yes.
Okay. I apologize, Mayor. The whole sequence is a little bit new to myself. I hadn't heard those comments before either, so I'm a little bit taken back and not sure how to answer that. But we'll look at our standard for the street section and whatever right of way we have there. I think the right of way is showing at 58 there.
I've got an idea.
Well,
the fire chief
I'm sorry.
The fire chief is doing his job. We asked him. He told us that, but I can't process it right now. There's no way. I can't do it. I need to see it written down. So, and it's something new, and I would not want to vote on it because I don't think it's fair to them, the developers. So I don't know. I know they don't want to hear it because it's been a 2-year process, but I make a motion to defer. So the chief can tell us what he wants. Y'all can show us what we're going to do. And then we can get back with the chief and really look at it. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's hard to make that decision now after what we just heard.
I'd just like to, if I can, just say one thing.
I saw that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and so
I understood that.
In front of our property, we will be.
But that's just at the turn. But then it narrows back down, correct?
It does, but it is for some distance in front, left and right.
That's what I need to see. And I'm sorry, I apologize for it, but this is what the concerns he's had and the concerns everybody else has. We really need to vent it out. After y'all get with Paul, we can talk one-on-one with Paul and the chief and make sure everybody does understand. Because I think if you vote on it now, after what we just heard, I won't say.
Yeah, and I don't know if the chief is aware of the improvements that you're now talking about. It sounds like apparently he's not. So I mean, we need to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And I understand this may be the first time you're hearing his concern.
It is, yeah.
And so I mean, unfortunately, that's just the card we've been dealt.
The improvements were all part of the original, or I mean, a part of our submittal when we did that. So
and I understand I understand his position too. It was a development right there, and so I still have a motion. I make a motion to defer. I know y'all don't want to hear it, but that's my motion to defer.
Second.
And it has been properly seconded. And Mr. City Attorney, we are not allowed to discuss anything other than the motion to defer, if I'm correct on that.
That's correct. And the motion to defer, of course, is till next month.
Can I ask one question, though? Presumably, if this is approved, the motion is approved to defer, then 10.2 through 10.5 would also need to be deferred, as well as the resolution item relative to the annexation.
That's correct.
And those would all be for the next month's meeting. And
it would not be necessary to hold the public hearings again.
That was my next question.
No.
So no more sitting. Those of you who may be back next month, you won't have to sit through the public hearings. Councilmember Wiles.
Before we leave this, and I totally agree with Vice Mayor McBroom's suggestion. But I don't want to leave this issue before I commend Chief Ty Cobb for bravely giving us his professional response about public safety without regard to where and how long we've been in this process. And that means nothing to develop. Again, I'm speaking to his expertise to address that issue now. So I personally don't want to see any, how shall I say, ramifications on Chief Cobb, because he was asked the question and he answered it in light of his expertise. If there's a hole that this is something that might be added to something in the future, then of course, that's a procedure or practice we want to add to it. But he bravely responded when called to point, and I appreciate his service and always have. And I think we are blessed to have that. And having, I'm not going to go personal, but having accessed that road numerous times, NXC transitional, I could go on and on. I appreciate the response to safety. That has nothing to do with prompt for the future development. And I do want to appreciate, thank you, Chief Cobb, for doing it.
All right, so we're on the motion to defer, which has been properly seconded. Any further discussion on the motion to defer of item 10.1? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski will take the vote.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye. Item 10.1 is deferred to the July meeting. Item 10.2, second consideration ordinance 4457, ordinance to amend the ordinance being the zoning ordinance of the City of Columbia to zone property being annexed by Resolution 2329 located at 6150 Trotwood Avenue, tax map 112, parcel 9 to Plan Unit Development Residential, Ward 1. I'll make a motion to defer.
Second.
Been properly second. Any discussion on that item? Hearing none. Mr. Jablonski?
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
That motion is approved. 10.3, second consideration of ordinance 4458 to amend ordinance 4400, the zoning ordinance of the City of Columbia to zone properties being annexed by Resolution 2329 located at tax map 112, parcels 203 and 1001 off Trotwood Avenue and Old Zion Road to Plan Unit Development Residential, Ward 1. I'll make the motion to defer.
Second.
It's been moved and properly second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Jablonski?
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 10.4. Is it 10.4? Am I right? 10.4, second consideration of ordinance number 4460, an ordinance to amend 4400, the zoning ordinance of the City of Columbia to zone property being annexed by Resolution 2329 located off Old Zion Road, tax map 112, parcel 1007, Plan Unit Development. I'll make a motion to defer item 10.4.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? Hearing none. Mr. Jablonski?
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Mrs. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is now deferred. Final item on this topic, 10.5, second consideration ordinance 4461 to amend ordinance 4400, the zoning ordinance by approving the Old Zion Road PUD master plan located off Trotwood Avenue, tax map 112, parcels 2.039, 10.01, and 10.07. I'll make the motion to defer.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on that? Hearing none. Mr. Jablonski?
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye. Item 10.5 is approved. That contains and completes items 10.1 through 10.5. If you are going to leave now that those matters have been taken off, please, we ask that you do so quietly so that we can continue to try to move through the meeting. Next up, item 10.6, second consideration of ordinance number 4462, an ordinance amending ordinance 4400, the zoning ordinance of the City of Columbia regarding the Tennessee mobile vending.
Motion to approve.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on item 10.6? I just want to add that I appreciate all the thought that I'm sorry.
Who's second?
Okay, I'm going to second it. I just want to say thanks to staff and a multitude of others, council members and food truck vendors, et cetera, that bring this now. It's by this time it's on second consideration, so it seems a little anticlimactic, but it still should be noted the good work that went into it. Any further discussion on item 10.6? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 10.7, second consideration 4463, fixing the tax rate for the City of Columbia for the year 2023 on all taxable property at the rate of 0.8251 per 100.
Motion to approve.
That item is moved and properly seconded. Item 10.7, any discussion on that item? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 10.8, second consideration of ordinance 4464 as amended, the appropriation ordinance for fiscal year July 1, 2023 through June 30, 2024. I'll also make the motion to approve on this. Again, now that it's at second consideration, it gets to a point where it seems like it's just, it's been on our agenda for several times, and we've had an opportunity to talk about it several times, but it should be pointing out that this is our budget ordinance, and it is a good budget ordinance at that. I'm looking forward to what is to come in the upcoming fiscal year for this July 1, 2023 through June 30, 2024 budget. So the motion has been made.
Second.
Been properly seconded by Councilmember Coleman. Any other discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye. That item is approved. Next item, 10.9, second consideration of ordinance number 4465 as amended, an ordinance to approve the classification and compensation plan for the employees of the City of Columbia for the 2023-2024 fiscal year.
Motion to approve.
It's been moved and properly seconded by Mr. Councilmember Green. Any further discussion on that item? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom?
Aye.
Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 1010, second consideration of ordinance 4466 as amended, an ordinance to amend the fiscal year 2022-23 budget ordinance providing for revisions to general sanitation and wastewater funds. That's item 10.10. It's been properly moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on items 1010? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom?
Aye.
Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 1011, second consideration of ordinance 4467 to amend Title 17, Chapter 1, Section 1708 of the Columbia Municipal Code, the same being the schedule fees for the collection of garbage and refuse within the corporate limits of the city of Columbia, Tennessee.
Motion.
It's been properly moved by Councilmember Green.
Second.
Properly seconded by Councilmember Coleman. Any discussion on item 1011? Hearing none, Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green? Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom?
Aye.
Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Next item, 1012. First consideration of ordinance number 4468, an ordinance to amend ordinance 4400, the same being the zoning ordinance of the city of Columbia by rezoning tax map 101, parcel 39, located at 6218 Casey Lane from rural character district to neighborhood character district, and established July 13th, 2023 is the date of public hearing. This is Ward 2. I do have several individuals who've signed up to speak tonight who are still here after what was a lengthy discussion. Thank you for your presence. I'm going to begin with David Mead. Mr. Mead, you'll have the floor for 3 minutes. We'll ask that you introduce yourself and proceed with confidence.
My name is David Mead. I live at 6224 Casey Lane. I spoke to the planning committee about the dangers on Casey Lane. To my disappointment and to many others in this room, it was passed on to you all. These are a few of the concerns that I voiced to them. I live on the south side of the S-curve that I'm sure you're all aware of. Car crashes are a common occurrence that we deal with. On rainy days, my wife and I will sometimes sit on the front porch and just listen for somebody to wreck. If somebody doesn't crash and need assistance, there's still many more that skid and slide all over the curve until they can get control. It's a running joke with our friends who text us asking if anyone has wrecked yet during bad weather. From the railroad tracks to the Shell store by the college, there's no shoulder. When I say no shoulder, I don't mean a spot to pull off. I mean there's a white line and then there's a ditch. And that's if you have a white line. A lot of those are broken off as well. You nearly have to stop to go across the railroad tracks at the T-Dot Center because it will destroy the suspension on your vehicle. There was a sewer line repair that was made in front of 6218 years ago, but the road wasn't fixed back properly. The asphalt has so many bumps that most people, including myself, cross over into the oncoming lane just to avoid running over them. I read over the traffic safety report submitted for the rezoning. I can assure you that installing rumble strips or cutting trees in the curve is not going to solve the crashes in that area. People will still go too fast and they'll end up in my yard or a neighbor's yard across the street. The only difference is that we'll be able to hear them hit the rumble strips before they crash. On February 16th, we had over 1.5 inches of rain in Columbia, as you see in those pictures. Some of those pictures are before the rain, some of them are after. Let's see. Spring water that comes off the park enters into my backyard and goes into an undersized pipe that travels under my 2 neighboring properties and into 6218 that we're discussing. I've been told that it discharges over there, but I've never actually been there to see myself. This pipe can handle very small rains, but a significant rainfall floods it completely out and turns my backyard and the neighbors into a pond. The spring water running off the park during that rain was enough to flood my backyard and the front yard of both my neighbors downstream, as you see. Keep in mind that we're on the upper side of the property that we're discussing. Where will this water go whenever it's loaded with houses? More houses and development will restrict this water more than it already is. Even with these issues, I love being on Casey Lane. I have great neighbors that are just far enough away that we still have privacy. Many of us have no issue with developing the property according to the current zoning restrictions. The motto of our city now is Old South Charm, New South Progress, something good around every corner. Building over 100 structures on 30 acres is not Old South Charm. Casey Lane and this type of development is not what residents of Casey Lane want around the corner. I ask that you please listen to the residents of Casey Lane and reject the rezoning of 6218 Casey Lane. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mead. Next up, Susan Schuff. And on deck, we have Daryl Schuff.
Good afternoon. Is it okay if we wait until everybody gets their binders? You're in the hot seat. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and City Council members. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. My name is Susan Schuff. My husband and I have lived at 6219 Casey Lane for 25 years. Our property is directly across the street from 6218 Casey Lane, which is requesting to be rezoned from CD2 to CD3. Myself and 56 Casey Lane and surrounding residents have signed a letter expressing strong opposition to rezone this property. And this is Exhibit A in your binder. I will be focusing on opposition to rezoning of 6218 Casey Lane based on infrastructure, specifically road, traffic, and safety issues. This portion of Casey Lane was established years ago as a county road to provide transportation to the Casey Farm on the east and the SQ Farm on the west side of the road. As such, Casey Lane is a very narrow, two-lane rural countryside road with no shoulder. And I have pictures, Exhibit B. 6218 Casey Lane is located between an active railroad track and a very dangerous S-curve. There's a picture of that, Exhibit C. This railroad track runs across Casey Lane and on the side and in the rear of the subject property. This railroad track and the S-curve kind of separate this specific area of Casey Lane, making it very unique. As such, this area pretty much would need to provide the needed infrastructure for any proposed development. This uniqueness also makes Casey Lane the only access road available for this site. As such, Casey Lane will absorb all the existing traffic, plus additional traffic created from this development if this is passed. There was a traffic study and safety study recently submitted by the developer that states that the proposed CD3 development containing 104 homes would add an additional 1,046 daily traffic vehicles to Casey Lane. And I've got a copy of that as Exhibit D. The additional 1,046 vehicles would be added to the existing 4,300 stated, that's the current daily traffic as stated in that report as Exhibit E. As such, the proposed CD3 development would increase daily traffic by 24.32%. This would be a significant increase to the current traffic flow. There is a 10-year and 5-year traffic accident report. They were both obtained from the City of Columbia Police Department. In Exhibit F is the 10-year traffic accident report, and that reflects 218 reported crashes on Casey Lane in 10 years. Exhibit G is a 5-year traffic report, which reflects 139 crashes on Casey Lane. There's been a 27.52% increase in accidents on those reports just in the last 5 years. It is noted that the above numbers are only reported accidents. In addition to the reported accidents, there's a significant number of unreported accidents. Exhibit H is a picture just of such an accident. And this is an area where there is no shoulder. So you can see in this picture, the car is nose down in the ditch. And that's typically what happens. Exhibits I and J are documentation letters regarding the large number of unreported accidents on Casey Lane. Please consider all the above issues and vote no to rezoning 6218 Casey Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schuff, for that presentation, and thank you also for these binders that you've provided. Daryl Schuff is up next, and Tanya Jean is on deck.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and please refer to Exhibit L for this presentation. Daryl Schuff, 6219 Casey Lane, adjacent property owner directly across the street from 6218 Casey Lane. I am strongly opposed to rezoning 6218 Casey Lane from CD2, rural countryside character sparsely settled or low density, to CD3, suburban neighborhood character medium density. The character of the specific areas, Casey Lane, is unique and different from other sections of Casey Lane in that it looks and functions as a rural countryside. All of the adjacent and immediate properties are zoned CD2 and include residences sitting on 2-acre lots and a working farm with a greenbelt designation. A drive through this section of Casey Lane shows an area predominantly CD2. The rural countryside area matrix in the Columbia Land Use Plan and the Connect Columbia Comprehensive Plan states changes to an overall character of an area should rarely occur. As such, any new development should blend with existing neighborhood assets and be compatible with the established rural character of the area. New development should be responsive and respectful of the natural features of this character area. A CD3 zone allowing 104 houses with some lots as small as 1/8 of an acre does not blend with the existing properties and is not compatible with the established rural character of the area. The land use plan element in the Connect Columbia Comprehensive Plan states that the intent of the rural countryside character area is to preserve existing rural countryside and areas with existing agricultural uses with the accommodation of limited residential growth. The development pattern is generally scattered with large distances between buildings or clustered in small communities. Clustering of new residential developments may be appropriate if 1. Infrastructure is available to support such a new development. It is noted that the road infrastructure, water drainage, and wastewater were all set up to handle CD2 rural countryside character, not CD3 suburban character. 2. The development is within the context of the surrounding rural environment. It is noted that CD3 preliminary drawings reflecting 104 houses sitting on as small as 1/8 acre lots is not in contact with the surrounding rural countryside area. 3. The development should be extremely limited to preserve important natural features, open space, and the rural character of the area. It is noted that 104 houses on 30 acres allowed by the CD3 zone would not meet this criteria in any way. Rural countryside character area, low density, paints a picture. Suburban neighborhood character, medium density, paints a picture. The problem with these two pictures is they do not blend. The CD3 suburban neighborhood does not blend with the existing CD2 countryside assets and is not compatible with the established rural character of the area. Please say no to change the zone and preserve rural countryside Casey Lane. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Schuff. Next up, Tanya Jean. I hope I'm pronouncing that. All right, Miss Jean, come on up.
Hi, my name is Tanya Jean. I live at 4004 Canoe Drive in Westwood subdivision. I use Casey Lane and Trotwood Avenue every day, and I'm very concerned about the traffic that would be added to those streets if this subdivision is approved, and I hope that you will vote no.
Thank you. Also have another member of the Jean family that's listed. If you could come on up, and I'm going to ask you to say your name, and I'm not even going to try it so that I don't mispronounce it.
Good evening. My name is Cecily Jean. I also live at 4004 Canoe Drive in Westwood subdivision. I, of course, have concerns about the added traffic, but I do have another main concern, and that is wildlife displacement. Just this year, we have noticed the increased presence of wild animals that we've not seen before in our neighborhood, including skunks, opossums, raccoons. And I'm concerned that as development continues in the area, we're going to be seeing increased traffic accidents involving wildlife as well. And I hope that you will vote no.
Thank you. Next up, Paulette Livingood.
Good evening. My name's Paulette Livingood. If I were living good, I wouldn't be here waiting to speak.
Well played, well played.
That's fine. I also live at the the base of the S curve, and our concerns are very real because we live with a fire extinguisher at our front door and towels at the ready because there have been a lot of accidents in front of our house, and there have been people that have had injuries, and there are just a lot of times that it's not reported. And we're very concerned about that. We're also concerned about the ambulance service and the fire service. We have no shoulders on Casey Lane. Where are they going to get? How are they going to get through? So please vote no for this, or at least lower the number of houses and the number of people that are going to be coming that way. It's kind of scary to think how it's going to be out our way. For you, this is another day's work, but for us, it's our lives. And thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Livengood. Next up, I have Tony Livengood.
I'm Tony Livengood. I live at 6227 Casey Lane. I can't add a whole lot to what my wife just said, but I would like to say that we've been there 37 years, and in that 37 years, I've replaced 13 mailboxes from people coming by the curve and hitting them. And I had never kept count of all the wrecks that have been on that curve. I wish I had, but Casey Lane is a dangerous place, and we don't need a whole lot more traffic there. So I ask that you vote no. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Livengood. Next up, Jenny Parashaw.
It's Paraschak, but that's okay.
So, I'm never going to throw anybody under the bus, but I'm reading what I'm seeing. But
That's okay.
In any event.
My name is Jenny Paraschak. I am the homeowner of 6213 Casey Lane, just one of the homes adjacent to 6218 Casey Lane. In your packet, tab K, you will see photos of some of the flooding issues of not only our properties, but of Casey Lane itself. The flooding happens at all different times of the year, multiple times per year. You will see cars as they try to make it through the rushing water. The representatives for this development will talk to you about how they plan to not add to our flooding issues. They talk about retention ponds, and they say they are willing to put in a bigger ditch. These two items do not give us any guarantee. This development of 104 homes with their rooftops, alleyways, roadways, and hardscapes will produce a significant amount of water runoff to add to the water that 6218 Casey Lane already takes on from Murray County Park. Once the digging and probable blasting of this land changes the natural flow of water, there is no one that can determine where the water underground will go. In my opinion, the movement of the earth will affect our natural springs, and the water will find its own path. With our last flood, residents of Casey Lane had sewage backup. Myself, my next-door neighbor, and residents of Criddle Meadows all had this issue. I once again will commend our city workers for trying to fix this. We will not know if it's fixed until our next flood. I must ask, can the sewage system of Casey Lane handle these extra homes, or will they just add to an existing problem? As I mentioned above, you have the photos of water rushing over the roadway. One photo included shows the water coming over Casey Lane very close to our dangerous S-curve. I fear that when you combine the S-curve, the fact that this road has no shoulder, and at times an excessive amount of water, we will see many more accidents with the projected addition of 1,046 trips on this road daily just from this proposed development. Let us not forget the new development approved on Rutherford Lane across from Woodard Elementary. This 123 to 25 home community will have access to Casey Lane through Criddle Meadows. That development, along with the strip mall at the Trotwood end of Casey Lane, will have already added additional traffic to our rural countryside road. So for the reasons of water and sewage issues, an extremely dangerous roadway with a working railroad track, I ask you to vote no to rezoning 6218 Casey Lane because I do not feel this is the area for this development. I would like to take one more moment and ask anyone here that is opposed to the rezoning of 6218 Casey Lane, please stand. Thank you all. Thank you, City Council.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. Next on the list, I have Gerald Vick, who's probably on the list just if any questions, and I'll also reserve it for the end for a part of the developer time that will be allotted. Sandy Thurston. Miss Thurston, I do apologize. Again, I'm reading what's here, so I don't know if that's. I'll just keep my mouth shut. You have the floor for 3
Are you
minutes.
saying I need to improve my
Well,
penmanship?
I'm keeping my mouth shut.
Again, I'm Sandy Thurston. I live at 6223 Casey Lane, and we're diagonally across the street from the proposed property. I ask that you would consider voting no on this because of all of the concerns we already have. I also am concerned about those homes that would back up to the railroad tracks. I don't know that Casey Lane could handle an emergency evacuation should we have a derailment or anything like that. If you would have something like that in place. So I just ask that you would vote no, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Then next up, I have Robert Thurston. All right.
Yes, I ranked a little bit better. Huh?
Well, actually, since you asked, it says Thornton. So actually, you write worse, but I took an educated guess that you might be with her.
Yep, good conducted. I would like you to vote no against this. We've lived at that property for about 7 years now, and we've moved our mailbox about 5 or 6 times in that amount of time. And no matter where we put it, it's getting hit. And we've got videos of a car hitting our mailbox and going over our driveway and stuff like that. And so we've had a lot of issues on that road because there's no shoulders or anything like that. It's just right there, the road and where the yard is and stuff. And also another thing is when we get a lot of rain, the water will come, it'll cross the road at my property and come across, and then it washes out down through there. And what they said, what the problem was, is down the road from there, the ditch is not big enough to handle the water that's going through there. And so the water starts to back up, and that's when it crosses the road. So if they do anything to that area, like I think at one time they said they were going to put a turning lane or whatever. Well, that's going to close in on that ditch, or it's going to do something. They'd have to, I'm worried about the water getting worse than what it is right now. But there's a major flooding problem when we have those heavy rains. So I'd like you to vote no against the rezoning.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Thurston. Next on the list, I have Thomas Hutto. Okay. All right. I do have the developers now that signed up. If y'all would like to speak or. All right, Mr. Evans. Well, we'll keep you for 3 minutes, but you'll have the floor.
Thank you very much. Before I get started, I taught high school for 17 years, and we always wanted kids to get involved. So that's awesome that people are just involved in that process. So keep it up, even though you're bringing up concerns that we would love to have an opportunity to address. My name is Aaron Evans, and I'm here on behalf of Mr. Kincaid and our company that is seeking this rezoning for Casey Lane. We've heard many comments about water and traffic and safety, and I'd like to address those one by one based off of the traffic studies that we have done, the water studies that we have done, and the safety studies. These notes are also included in your staff report and the information from the Planning Commission, so you're able to refer to those as well. But the quick summary of that is we did have a safety study and traffic study done, which indicated there are 3 options to increase the safety on Casey Lane, one of which was rumble strips and some reflective paint, the other of which would be some removal of trees around the S-curve for a better sight line, and the third of which would be to realign Casey Lane, which would be a massive undertaking for any governmental organization, notwithstanding a private entity, to do that. We are more than happy to take on the first two of those as part of this development, should the staff ask us to do that in the next phase of this study. So I just want that to be very clear. Speaking of road safety, one thing that you wouldn't know because it's not really part of this plan yet is we have a 20-foot right-of-way addition to the road on our side of Casey Lane that would include a shoulder and a larger drain. So some of the concerns that are being addressed or being raised would be addressed with that particular item. The other thing I'd like to mention to you today before I take any questions is we are looking for, we being the City of Columbia, is looking for eliminating nonconformities to the suggested plan, the Columbia Comprehensive Plan, and changing this zoning to CD3 actually matches what the suggested use for this land is. So this, by approving this, we are actually eliminating a nonconformity, which is an objective 1.5.1N in the city ordinance, city zoning ordinance, is trying to accomplish one of those objectives. We're very cognizant of the zoning ordinances that we're being asked to follow, and as we set up this design and this preliminary concept, which is just that, it's just a concept, it's not a plan, it's just an idea. We have followed all the regulations that have been set forth by the City Council. We have followed all the staff meetings and the suggestions that we have been given from them. Additionally, we have followed the zoning ordinances. We followed the suggestion of the traffic study. We followed suggestions of the water studies. And we feel very confident in what we're asking for is within the boundaries of the rules that you have set up for us to use. At this point, we are asking for moving forward for the discussion on rezoning to CD3.
All right, any questions for Mr. Evans at this time? Any member of council? Seeing none, Mr. Evans, don't go too far. We may have another question or two for you.
Yes, sir.
All right, that completes the list of speakers that have signed up, and we've now also heard from the developers, so we're now back on item 10.12 for motion and or discussion.
Are we able to bring Chief Cobb up?
Mr. Coleman.
Mr. Manager, can Mr. Cobb come up?
Chief Cobb, please.
Hey, Chief. Thank you again for, I want to echo what Councilmember Wiles said, your last comment and information you shared with us. And I'm going to ask you that about Casey Lane now. I think they are very comparable roads and something we need to hear you weigh in on, if you will.
You have to remember, too, though, Trotwood Avenue State Highway has a lot of traffic. Now, I do know that Casey Lane has traffic with the college, and there's not shoulders along Casey Lane's ditch, just like I've heard. I will say this, worked a lot of wrecks in the curve, and I know Public Works Director Jeff DeWire has tried to address some of that in the past, because when it rains, it gets real slick. I would have to run a report just to see how many crashes we've had there, but we have had a lot. I will study that some more and review that. That's about what I can tell you now, but I don't have the numbers on the number of crashes that we've had, but I can tell you in that S-curve, just like some of the residents have spoke up, it's been quite a few.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Chief Cobb? All right, hearing none. Mr. Coleman, back to you, or Councilmember Hardison? Not for Chief Cobb, okay. Councilmember Hardison.
I don't know if this will be for Chief Cobb or not, but I guess maybe it could be. My thing is, if the developer is wanting to put some remedy on the flooding as far as increase the ditch size, how would that go into effect with the right-of-way? Well, adding shoulders, because you're decreasing it when you're increasing the ditch size? That seemed like that's kind of going backwards.
Thank you for your question. That would occur on our side of the road. So on the 6218 portion on our side, we would extend that 20-foot right of way on our end and upgrade that line of drain as it goes towards the railroad tracks.
Okay, another question. With that being said, would that be the only area along Casey Lane? I'm not talking about Casey Lane that's past Hampshire Pike, but in this around the curve and going to the railroad track, would that be the only area that you just described where there's going to be an increase on the shoulder? Just the exit of the subdivision?
That's correct. We only own that portion of that part of Casey Lane, so we don't have the ability to or the right to go and take other people's property and do that. So directly to this, yes, directly in front of Casey Lane, our portion of that is the portion that would have the widened road.
Does this development have only one way in and one way out?
The proposal is two entrances on Casey Lane.
Where would the other one be?
Mr. Vick, you have there's one. If I believe it's in your packet as well, but let me, from my memory, it connects with the adjoining road and then one closer to the north side. I'll let Mr. Vick explain that.
There's one proposed connection that's just north of where the TDOT property is, and it would be directly across from the road that comes from the subdivision.
Beside the storage building?
Correct.
Okay.
And then the other one is pretty much close to the other end of our property with just the width of about 120 feet from the corner of the property.
Kind of like where the existing entrance is to the...
Very close to the existing driveway.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Vice Mayor has a question for Mr. Vick.
Ms. Harrison had a good question there. When you widen it out, that you're talking about widening it on your side. Right now, that ditch is straight. So what would you do at the end?
When we did the study, the preliminary study on the water, we came to understanding that the ditch on that side seems to kind of flatten out, and so we're already proposing the right of way there, the additional right of way there, so we'd have room to pull it in. Well, actually, the ditch runs down to where the creek goes onto our property, so we'd be able to.
It runs down to the train track.
Right, it runs.
Okay.
The ditch along the road comes down to the stream that goes around behind the TDOT property and crosses railroad tracks. So we would be able to improve that whole area, that whole section, because it's all within the property.
Thanks. I got a question. Mr. Boshier.
All right. Thank you, fellas. We may come back to you. I think it's a question for Donnie Boshiers.
Don, if you could come back in, please.
Yes, the question that the guy have is, we've heard 2 or 3 times when we had that major rain, the sewer backed up into these people's houses.
Both of those were problems with their private sewer line. It was not a problem with.
Oh. All right. Well.
Yeah.
All right.
Are you?
Just go. You talk to me. Don't worry about the crowd.
Which are you talking about in the area there?
No, down there at the bottom.
By the railroad track.
To this sewer, are they gonna have to do any fixing down here? Or do you know yet the lines are okay? I mean, what I'm getting at is we're at 100 houses to the sewer line. What is it going to do down here?
Yeah, down towards the railroad track.
The railroad track.
Yeah,
I guess that's where the problem.
My understanding is those problems were with the service line. That our line was clear. Now we did have a problem on the other side of the railroad track that was a blockage in our service in our sewer main, but it was cleared. But
so you don't know, but you don't know yet if this subdivision will impact that down there.
No, I don't. I have not really looked at it. No.
That would be all. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate
Councilman Coleman?
Here's my question, is a little bit general. Is it possible for us to get that information from Mr. Boshears? Or is that a reasonable thing to ask of? Or
He left before we could even tell him. Hey, you know, we now have available seating in the main room. You're welcome to stay.
I kind of got that broken in.
were you able to hear that, Mr. Boshears?
I'm sorry.
So the information that Vice Mayor McBroom was asking about, is it possible for us to get that information?
Oh yeah, yes sir. I can get it for you first thing in the morning. Not a problem.
So very quickly, okay.
But if my memory serves me correctly, there were service line problems where it comes into our line, but there were some extended service lines in that area, if I remember correctly.
I think Councilman Coleman's question is the impact of this project on downstream. Is that
correct?
Is there any way to determine that before this project is fully
Oh
designed?
yeah. I have our engineer look at it. I mean, he can do the hydraulics of the line, the capacity that's there now, how it impacts the.
I think that's what your question
Yeah, that is. Thank
Yeah.
you for clarifying for me.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Now that might take a little longer than in the morning.
I didn't think you could get it that quick. That's what
I was very impressed.
Yeah.
City
yeah.
staff's great.
No.
Well, that'd be helpful information. And so thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Boshears? We're back on item 10.12.
I'm going to make a motion to defer in order to get the information previously just spoken about with Mr. Boshears, as well as perhaps to give Chief Cobb some more time to get some of the data and answers to the questions I have for him.
All right. There's a motion to defer on the table. Is there a second to that motion? Hearing no second, the motion to defer fails for a lack of second. So we're back on 10.12. Is there a motion on 10.12? City Attorney, what is the obligation on a motion or a lack of a item to obtain a motion?
If the item does not obtain a motion, the item fails. However, it is better from a procedural standpoint if you all wish for it to fail to make a motion to deny it and state the basis for the denial pursuant to the criteria in the ordinance, which I think you have the criteria spelled out in the actual ordinance itself that you're reviewing it under. If you're looking at section 4 of the ordinance, the criteria that you review it under has those criteria outlined.
Mr. Oda, that's not the way it works. We had public comment opportunity and you declined your opportunity to be heard. Well, we had public comments. That's already happened. So we're out of the public comment phase. We're on now to council discussion. Unless there's a question for the developer, we're on the explanation from the city attorney relative to a failure for a lack of a motion, but also the procedural recommendation or the recommendation that procedurally may be better if a motion was made subject to one of the criterion.
And I can read those 3 criteria if the council wishes. The criteria are the proposed rezoning is in agreement with the comprehensive plan and any applicable local area plans. If you find that it is not in agreement, then you would state the motion that you found that it was not in agreement. It has been determined that the legal purposes for which zoning exists are not contravened, and it has been determined that there will be no adverse effect upon the adjoining property owners unless such effect can be justified by the overwhelming public good or welfare. If you found that one of those criteria was not being satisfied, then those are the criteria that you evaluate rezonings under, and it's best to state your motion if you're wishing to deny it under one of those bases.
All right. Thank you, Mr. City Attorney. You've heard the explanation from the City Attorney. Councilmember Tony Green.
I would like to make a motion to deny due to the adverse effect that it will have on their community and increased dangers and safeties because of development and the infrastructure that's currently in place at this time in that area.
A second.
All right. It's a proper motion, Mr. City Attorney. It's been properly seconded by, we'll call it Councilmember Wiles. Any discussion, I will just say on that, I support the motion. I do believe that this property ultimately will be developed in some way, and I've spoken with a number of residents, many of whom are here tonight, and have expressed that. I just can't, in good faith, support it as it's presented tonight. I would have thought that perhaps the developer would have heard the sort of request that maybe a CD3L might meet with better approval on this. Because I think that, at least from my perspective, certainly alleviates some of the adverse effects that we're seeing, and that leads to the motion. But I guess there'll be another opportunity for that. But I do appreciate and acknowledge that motion. It has been properly seconded. Is there any other discussion? Vice Mayor, did you have something? No. Okay. Any other discussion on the motion to deny based upon contravention to Section C under Section 4 of the zoning ordinance? Councilmember Coleman.
I just want to say that I'll be abstaining from the vote just because I do feel like we are lacking enough information on that final item. But of course, the council works the way the council works. So, but I'll be abstaining and wanted to explain my reason.
All right. We'll take the vote. Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman? Pass. Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiles?
Aye.
Vice Mayor McBroom? Aye. Mayor Mulder?
Aye. That motion to deny is approved. Next item. If you are leaving, we ask you please to leave quietly. Item 10.13, first consideration of ordinance 4469 to amend the Columbia Municipal Code by repealing and deleting Title 12, Chapter 1, Section 12102 pertaining to the building code and adopting a new Section 12102.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Any discussion on item 10.13? Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion to approve. Or we'll take the vote. I'm sorry.
Mr. Coleman?
Thank you.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Mr. Marshall? Mrs. Wiles? Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Final item of the night, 10.14, first consideration of ordinance 4470 to amend the City of Columbia Purchasing Manual as adopted by ordinance 4209, adding a new section 315 on construction management services, and by changing the bid amount from $25,000 to $50,000 and purchase order amount from $4,000 to $8,000 at all place where it is referenced in the purchasing manual. I'll make a motion to approve that item. It's been properly seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman?
Aye.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Aye. Mr. Marshall? Aye. Mrs. Wiles? Aye. Vice Mayor McBroom? Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Any other business for the good of council? Mr. City Manager?
Yes, Mayor. If you recall, you moved Resolution 9-1 to the end of the agenda since the ordinances were deferred. It would probably be appropriate action to defer that resolution.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. That item will go back to 9.1 that was placed on the hill of the docket, Resolution 2329, a resolution to annex and approve a plan of services for properties and portions of properties at tax map 112, parcels 203, 9, 1001, 1007, located off Trotwood Avenue in the city of Columbia, Tennessee, Ward 1. I'll make the motion to defer to the July meeting. Second. It's been properly seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman? Aye. Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mrs. Hardison? Aye. Mr. Marshall? Aye. Mrs. Wiles? Aye. Vice Mayor McBroom? Aye. Mayor Mulder?
Aye, that item is approved. Any other business for the good of council? Hearing none. Thanks everyone tonight for your patience and for being here. It's been a long meeting, but it's been a good meeting nonetheless. We have no need for executive session. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Jablonski.
Mr. Coleman? Aye. Mr. Green?
Aye.
Ms. Hardison? Aye. Mr. Marshall? Aye. Mrs. Wiles? Aye. Vice Mayor McBroom?
Aye. Aye. We are adjourned.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering. Click that.